Hey everyone. Welcome back to Harry vs. X. Get ready for an amazing tale. Bastet and Anubis raised Harry at age 6 and Death Eaters fled from the Jackal god's fury. Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The boy the storm remembered the storm came in from the north, which the old women on Privet Drive said was always a bad sign. It rolled over little whinging just after 7 in the evening, swallowing the last pale scraps of summer light and replacing them with something green and furious. Thunder moved through the clouds like something enormous turning over in its sleep. The streetlights flickered, thought about it, and gave up entirely. Inside number 4, the Dursleys had drawn their curtains, turned their television up loud, and collectively decided that the weather outside was simply not their problem. Neither was the boy sitting on the front step. Harry Potter was 6 years old, and he had learned very early that the front step was the place you went when you were in trouble, when you were in the way, or when your cousin had decided he wanted the entire living room to himself. Tonight it was all three. He sat with his knees pulled up to his chest, his too large shirt already soaked through, his glasses doing absolutely nothing for his vision in the rain. He couldn't go to the cupboard under the stairs because Uncle Vernon had locked it. He couldn't knock on the door because he tried that twice already, and the second time Uncle Vernon had opened it just long enough to tell him in a very quiet, very final voice that if he knocked again, things would go significantly worse for him. So he sat. He was good at sitting. He was good at being still and small and quiet, at making himself into a shape that took up as little space as possible. He'd been practicing that skill for as long as he could remember, which wasn't very long because he didn't remember much before Privet Drive. Just warm light, sometimes. Just a sound like laughter. Just something red and bright that he thought might have been someone's hair. The rain hit the pavement so hard it bounced. Harry watched it bounce. He wasn't crying, which he was privately proud of, because his eyes stung and his chest felt like something was sitting on it, and crying would have been the easiest thing in the world to do right now. He just watched the rain and breathed in the smell of wet concrete and thought about nothing in particular. A cat sat down next to him. He hadn't seen it come. One moment the step beside him was empty, the next it wasn't. It was a large cat, golden-colored in a way that had nothing to do with the dim and watery light coming from the Dursleys' windows, with eyes the precise shade of amber that you sometimes saw in old jewelry. It looked at him with an expression of calm, complete assessment, the way very intelligent creatures look at things they are deciding about. "Hello," Harry said. The cat blinked slowly. "You're going to get wet," he told it. The cat looked at him with the particular patience of something that has existed since before the concept of weather was invented and finds the suggestion mildly amusing. Harry reached out, carefully, the way Aunt Petunia had shrieked at him never to do with strange animals. The cat leaned its head into his hand. It was warm, startlingly, almost impossibly warm, the heat moving up through Harry's cold-soaked fingers and into his wrist and up his arm like something alive. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "I live here," he said, gesturing at number 4, though the word live felt strange and not quite right, the way words sometimes did when you used them to mean something slightly different from what they actually meant. "Sort of. My aunt and uncle, they don't really," he stopped. He tried again. "I'm not supposed to be out here. But I'm not supposed to be in there either. Right now." The cat's amber eyes watched him with an attention so complete and so focused that it made his chest ache a little, because nothing had ever looked at him quite like that. Like he was something worth the effort of looking at. "I don't mind the rain, actually," he said. "It's nice. It smells good." Lightning split the sky overhead, close enough that the thunder came right behind it like a shout. Harry flinched, just slightly. The cat pressed itself more firmly against his side, solid and warm and real, and something about that simple physical fact of something choosing to be beside him, made his throat close up in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He breathed through it. He was good at that too. "I had a dream last night," he said, because he talked to the cat at school sometimes, the Weasley boys' rat and other things that couldn't judge him or report back, and it felt natural, talking to this one, the way some things just feel natural without explanation. There was a big dog. Black, I think. It was sitting at the end of my bed in the cupboard, but it wasn't scary. It was just, sitting there. Like it was keeping watch. The cat made a sound. Not quite a meow. Something lower, more deliberate. Do you think that means something? Harry asked. The amber eyes half closed. Harry leaned his cheek against the top of the cat's warm head and looked out at the drowning street, at the water running in rivers along the gutters, at the lightning turning everything white and clean for half a second at a time. He felt, strangely, less cold than he had a moment ago. Less like something the storm was happening to. He didn't notice, or couldn't have explained if he had, that the rain was no longer falling on him. That there was a precise circle of dry pavement around the step, maybe 3 feet in diameter, and that the water divided itself around it the way a stream divides around a stone. He also didn't notice the second figure at the end of the garden path until it spoke. You found him first, said a voice like the space between heartbeats. Again. Harry looked up. The man, if man was the right word, and some part of Harry's brain that was older than reason said firmly that it wasn't, stood at the garden gate. He was tall in a way that felt less like height and more like depth, like he went further down than a person should. He wore black, but not the flat black of cloth, it moved. He had the head of a jackal, dark and sharp-eared, with eyes like molten gold, and he stood in the storm with the particular stillness of something that is never moved by anything unless it chooses to be. Harry stared. He was aware that he should probably be frightened. He checked, the way you check your pockets, methodically, honestly, and found that he wasn't. There was something about the figure that bypassed fear entirely and went straight to something more fundamental, a recognition that had no name. Hello, Harry said. The jackal head tilted. You are not afraid. No, Harry said, puzzled by this, as if the statement were obvious. Should I be? Most are. I'm not most, Harry said. He wasn't sure where that came from. It felt true, though, in the particular way that things feel true when you haven't been taught yet that you're not supposed to say them. The golden cat unwound itself from his side and stood, stretching luxuriously, and then it shifted, not the way animals shift, not the way shape change happened in the stories Harry had found in the school library, but the way light shifts when a cloud moves, one thing becoming another thing without any middle moment, and there was a woman standing where the cat had been. She was golden-skinned and dark-haired, her eyes still that precise amber, wearing linen the color of afternoon sun. She had the ears of a cat, tilted toward him, and she was looking at him with an expression that did something very complicated to the space behind Harry's sternum. There, she said. Her voice was warm and a little wry, the voice of someone who has won an argument and intends to be gracious about it. She spoke to the figure at the gate, not to Harry, but her hand found the top of Harry's wet head and rested there with a gentleness that made him absolutely rigid with the effort of not leaning into it. I told you. You told me it was interesting, Anubis said. He moved through the gate without opening it, without the gate moving at all, simply passing through the space the way water passes through its own level. He crouched down in front of Harry, bringing those gold eyes level with his face. Up close, his presence was extraordinary, not threatening but vast, the way standing at the edge of the ocean is not threatening but demands that you understand your own smallness. What is your name, child? Harry, he said. Harry Potter. The figure's eyes moved over him, and Harry had the very distinct feeling of being read, thoroughly and precisely, the way a very fast reader goes through a book, not skimming, not missing anything, but moving with a speed and completeness that left nothing unexamined. His hands. His too large clothes. The way he sat. The little white-knuckled grip he kept on his own knees. The circles under his eyes. The way his shoulders were braced as though against a coming blow that he'd learned to expect from every direction. Anubis was quiet for a long moment. Who has done this? He asked, and his voice had not changed at all in tone or volume, which was somehow more alarming than if it had. Done what? Harry said. This. A hand, long-fingered, dark, impossibly steady, gestured at Harry's entirety without touching him. This shape that you've made of yourself. This small and careful thing. Harry's jaw tightened. I'm fine, he said, which was a lie he'd been using for so long it had worn smooth, the way river stones are smooth, and which came out with the flat automatic ease of something he said without choosing to. You are not fine, Anubis said, with absolute gentleness and zero room for negotiation. But you will be. And then, without asking permission, without any ceremony at all, the god of death reached out and pressed 2 fingers to Harry's forehead, and the cold went away. Not just the rain cold. All of it. The bone-deep, years-long cold of being unwanted, that particular chill that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with being somewhere that makes it clear, in 100 small daily ways, that your presence is tolerated at best and resented at worst. That cold. It left. Harry pulled in a breath like a man surfacing from water. Bastet knelt beside him, which she did with feline ease, no bending of the knees so much as a folding, a settling, her amber eyes on his face. We have been looking for you, she said. Not long. But looking. For me. He couldn't keep the disbelief out of his voice. For you specifically. She said it with such certainty that it cut straight through the disbelief. There are many children in the world. There are not many like you. I'm nobody, Harry said. He said it the way he'd been taught to say it, through repetition and correction over 6 years, firmly, without self-pity, as simple statement of fact. Bastet's expression shifted. Her cat ears flattened just slightly. It was, Harry would later understand, the expression she made in a half-second before she did something about something she'd decided was unacceptable. You are not nobody, she said. Her voice was still warm, but it had an edge now, not directed at him, directed at something he'd been made to believe. You are Harry. You are brave enough to sit in a storm without crying. You are kind enough to say hello to a strange cat. You have a heart that goes on beating when most would have. She stopped. She made a decision. You are ours, she said instead, which was simpler and truer than all the rest. If you'll have us. Harry looked from her to Anubis and back again. The rain fell around them on all sides. The Dursleys' television laughed at something through the wall. What are you? He asked. Because he was 6 and practical, and that seemed like the right question. Gods, Anubis said, without any self-consciousness whatsoever. Harry considered this. Egyptian? A pause. Yes, Anubis said, and there was something in his voice that might have been the ancient equivalent of being caught off guard. You know of us. There were books in the school library, Harry said. I liked the one about the gods. You weigh hearts. He looked at Anubis with frank, 6-year-old directness. Is my heart okay? Something moved across the god's face that he didn't have a name for. He looked at Harry for a long moment, this small, soaking wet, entirely serious child who had just asked the god of death to evaluate his soul as though it were a reasonable request, with no more anxiety than he might have asked a teacher to check his work. Your heart, Anubis said, is extraordinary. Harry nodded, satisfied, and looked at Bastet. And your Bastet? The cat goddess. The very same. I like cats, Harry said. She smiled, and it was like watching the sun find a gap in storm clouds. I know. He looked at both of them again. He was very still in the particular way that he became still when he was thinking hard, the way all of him went quiet while the internal part of him raced. He thought about number 4, Privet Drive, with its locked cupboard and its careful list of his failures and its way of making the walls feel like they were always just slightly too close. He thought about the dream with the black dog at the end of his bed, keeping watch. He thought about the warm light he sometimes remembered, the laughter, the red hair. He thought about how Bastet had felt, pressed against his side in the rain. Warm. Certain. Present. Okay, Harry said. Bastet blinked. Okay. Yes. He stood up, uncurling from the step with the particular resolution of someone who has made a decision they intend to keep. His glasses were still fogged and useless with rain. He took them off and held them, squinting slightly. "I'll come with you. If that's what you mean." "That is what we mean," Anubis said. "Will you bring me back?" A pause, honest and considered. "That," Anubis said, "will depend on many things. On what you choose." Harry found that he appreciated the honesty more than he would have appreciated a comfortable lie. He nodded. "All right. I need to get my things." There was a short, considering silence. "What things?" Bastet asked. "The library book. I borrowed it from the school but I didn't return it because I hid it in the cupboard and I should take it back. And my mum's photograph. There's one. I found it in the bin." A pause. Aunt Petunia threw it out. Neither god said anything. Bastet's ears were very flat. Anubis's expression had gone very still in a way that Harry didn't understand yet but would come to know well, the stillness that meant he was deciding what to do with something he was feeling. "I'll get them," Bastet said. She said it with the even, controlled lightness of someone maintaining composure through significant effort. She walked through the front wall of number 4 as though it weren't there. Harry watched the wall. "Right," he said. To Anubis, "She does that?" "She does many things," Anubis said. "You will become accustomed to it." 2 minutes later, Bastet came back through the wall carrying a library book about Egyptian mythology, worn at the spine, and a small photograph, small enough to fit in a palm, a little crumpled at one corner, the kind of image that has been rescued from something before it was destroyed entirely. She placed both carefully in Harry's hands. Her expression, when he looked up, was absolutely neutral in a way that suggested a great deal going on underneath it. Harry looked at the photograph. A young woman with red hair and green eyes, his green eyes, he recognized that, the specific shape of them, laughing at something off camera, her whole face open with it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he tucked it into the chest pocket of his soaking shirt, against his heart. "Okay," he said again. "I'm ready." Anubis looked at him, this small, wet, gravely certain child holding a library book about Egyptian gods and carrying his dead mother's photo over his heart, and made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was something shorter and quieter than that, something that had more weight. "Then come," he said, and held out his hand. Harry took it. The storm swallowed number 4, Privet Drive, and they were gone. The place they brought him was not what he expected, and he wasn't sure what he'd expected. It wasn't the land of the dead, not exactly. It was adjacent to it, the way a house is adjacent to a river, aware of it, shaped by its proximity, but distinct. It was warm. That was the first thing. Warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, a warmth that was environmental and fundamental, like being somewhere that simply ran at a higher register of aliveness than the places he'd been before. There was a house. Actual architecture, stone and tile and columns in the Egyptian style, but softened and made habitual. There were books stacked beside the door, there was a linen cloth drying on a line between 2 columns, there was a clay pot of herbs growing in a patch of actual sunlight that fell from somewhere unspecified above. There was a large, low couch with too many cushions on it. There was a stone table in the courtyard with marks carved into it that Harry recognized as a game board of some kind. It looked, above everything else, like somewhere that people lived. Harry stood in the courtyard and turned in a slow circle, looking at it. "It's nice," he said. Bastet made a sound behind him that might have been relief. "Good. It took some adjusting." "You adjusted it for me?" "The cushions are new," she admitted. "And the herbs. I wasn't sure what you'd need." Harry looked at the herbs. He looked at the books stacked by the door. He looked at the game board. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs, which had a spider in the corner that he'd named Francis and talked to in the dark. He sat down on the low couch and looked at his hands. They were completely dry, he noticed. The rain was gone as thoroughly as if it had never been, though he didn't remember a moment of drying. He still had the library book. He set it carefully on a nearby surface. Anubis stood in the archway between the courtyard and the deeper interior of the house, and he was watching Harry with that reading a book attention, thorough and unhurried. "You will have questions," he said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "Loads of them." A pause. "But maybe not right now." Something in the god's posture eased, very slightly. "No. Not right now." He moved into the courtyard and sat cross-legged on the floor, not the couch, the floor, with the natural ease of something with no physical self-consciousness whatsoever, and something about the sight of the god of death sitting on the ground with his elbows on his knees and his gold eyes open and attentive was so deeply, simply companionable that Harry felt the very last knot of the evening release from his chest. Bastet sat beside Harry on the couch. She was in her human with cat ears form, which Harry was already deciding was her usual shape, and she had conjured a blanket from somewhere, heavy wool, the kind that weighs you down in the good way, and draped it over his shoulders without making a production of it, without asking if he wanted it, just doing it the way people who know what you need do it without requiring your acknowledgement. Harry pulled it around himself. For a while none of them spoke. Outside, if outside was the right word for the ambient, sourceless warmth that existed beyond the courtyard, something moved. Distant and enormous. The sound of it was like sand and wind, like the long exhalation of something that had been breathing for longer than memory. "What's that?" Harry asked. "The field of reeds," Anubis said. "The afterlife, in its largest form. You will hear it sometimes. It is nothing to be concerned about." "It sounds like the sea," Harry said. "It is somewhat like the sea." A pause. "In that it goes on." Harry thought about that. "It's not scary," he said. "No," Anubis agreed. "It is not." Harry pulled the photograph out of his pocket and held it, not looking at it, just holding it. Bastet did not say anything. She put one warm hand on his back, between his shoulder blades, and kept it there. "My parents died," Harry said. It wasn't a question. He'd known that since he was old enough to ask and receive the Dursley's brisk, dismissive version of events, car crash, his mum and dad died in a car crash, these things happen, stop asking. He'd never believed the car crash part, because the lie in it was too obvious to a child who had nothing else to do but think. How they really died, I mean. It wasn't a car crash, was it? No, Anubis said. It was not. Will you tell me? Another honest pause. When you are older, Anubis said. Not because you cannot bear it. But because some truths take root better in prepared ground. You will need to know certain other things first. Harry considered this, and found it reasonable. All right. Bastet's hand moved, just slightly, between his shoulder blades. Rubbing, slow and steady. Can I ask one more thing? Ask what you like, Bastet said. Why me? He asked it plainly, without the undertow of self-pity that the question usually carries when wounded people ask it. He asked it the way a scientist asks a question, genuinely curious, seeking data. There are lots of children. Worse off than me, probably. Why specifically me? Anubis and Bastet exchanged a look over his head. It was the look of two people deciding how much of a complex truth to give a person who is ready for it. There is a quality in you, Anubis said carefully, that is neither common nor easily explained. You are not simply brave or simply good, many are both. You are something rarer. You have lived in a house that taught you every day that you were worth nothing, and you have not believed it. He paused. That is very difficult to do. Most people, over time, believe what they are told about themselves. I just didn't think they were right, Harry said simply. Yes, Anubis said. Exactly that. Bastet made a sound, quiet, approving. Harry felt it more than heard it. Also, she said, and there was something different in her voice now, lighter and more careful at the same time, sometimes the gods see a child and they simply know. The way you know a song before you remember where you heard it. She paused. I saw you in that storm and I knew. Harry nodded slowly. He thought he understood that, actually. He understood knowing things without knowing how you knew them. He'd had that feeling about lots of things, about plants, about animals, about the precise moment when silence in the Dursley house meant that he should get very small and very quiet. A kind of knowledge that lived in the body, below the reach of language. All right, he said, for the third time that night, and meant it most of all. He slept on the couch under the heavy blanket, and Bastet sat at one end of it with his feet in her lap, and Anubis stayed on the floor in the courtyard, not sleeping because gods don't sleep, simply present in the way mountains are present, without effort, without agenda, with a permanence that was its own form of comfort. Harry's dreams were warm, and nothing in them chased him. 10 years moved the way years do when life has texture and substance to it, not quickly, exactly, but fully, without the thin watery feel of years spent simply enduring. Harry grew. He learned. The learning was not like school. It was not like anything he'd been told about school. Anubis taught him the way someone teaches when they have genuine patience and genuine expectations, not the forced patience of someone suppressing frustration, but the real kind, the kind rooted in the understanding that time spent learning is never wasted. He taught Harry to read hieroglyphs before the boy was 7, and found him a willing student not because Harry was trying to please him. Harry had been trained out of trying to please adults by years of futility, but because Harry was genuinely interested, which was much better. He taught him the shape of the world, all of it, not just the comfortable parts. He taught him about death without mystifying it or softening it or dressing it in euphemism, because a child raised by the god of death should understand death correctly, as the natural completion of a thing, as the threshold that all living things cross eventually, as something that is neither punishment nor enemy. Harry absorbed this with the same frank practicality he absorbed everything. He did not become morbid. He became, instead, unusually unafraid, not reckless, not careless, but genuinely free of the fear that most people carry under everything, the fear that makes so many of the terrible decisions people make. Bastet taught him differently. She taught through motion, through instinct, through the animal language of bodies in space. She was an extraordinary teacher of combat not because she broke technique down into principles but because she embodied it so completely that spending time with her rewired your own body's understanding of movement. Harry was 12 when she started teaching him to fight and 14 when he won his first spar against her, not completely, not cleanly, but enough that she let the contest end and sat back on her heels and looked at him with real satisfaction. Again, she said. You're bleeding, Harry pointed out. She looked at the small cut on her forearm with the expression of someone who has just noticed a stray thread on their clothing. So I am. She met his eyes. Again. He was also, by that point, capable of things that did not have a name in mortal magic systems. What he could do wasn't wand work, had nothing to do with wand work, predated it by several thousand years. He could speak to the dead, not in the way mediums claimed, but actually, genuinely, in the language that souls use once they've crossed over, a language Anubis had been teaching him since he was 8. He could walk in the space between the living world and what lay beyond it the way most people walk between rooms, with familiarity, without drama. He had an understanding of Ma'at, divine order, balance, truth, that had started as an academic concept and become something more physical over time, a kind of compass that lived in his chest and tilted toward or away from things depending on their alignment with fundamental truth. And there was the magic. His magic. That had always been there, had been there in little whinging when strange things happened around him, when he'd operated himself onto a school roof fleeing from Dudley's gang, when he'd turned his teacher's wig blue by accident. Under Bastet's guidance it grew from a startling unpredictable force into something refined and responsive, something that moved when he wanted it to move and stopped when he wanted it to stop. He had not learned it through a wand. He suspected he could use one but had never tried. He didn't see the point. He grew tall. He grew into his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, distinctly his mother's, startling and vivid. He grew into a version of himself that was genuinely at ease in the world, which is a rarer thing than it sounds, because ease is not the same as carelessness. He cared about things enormously. He cared about animals, about people in trouble, about the dead who came sometimes to the edges of the divine realm and needed to be spoken to, guided, reassured. He cared about Anubis and Bastet with a fierceness that sometimes frightened him by its depth and then stopped frightening him, because Anubis had taught him that great feeling was not a weakness. He asked about his parents when he was 9, as promised. Anubis told him about Voldemort. About the killing curse. About the scar on his forehead, which Harry had always had and never questioned. About the prophecy. About all of it, laid out with the god's characteristic honesty, no softening, no dramatizing, just the full shape of the truth made available to a person old enough to hold it. Harry listened. He asked precise, considered questions. He was quiet afterward for one afternoon, sitting in the courtyard with the library book and his mother's photograph, and then at dinner he came back and ate his food and talked to Bastet about a soul he'd spoken to that week, a young man, very confused, not sure he'd died, and that was that. He did not become consumed by grief or rage. He became, instead, informed. Equipped. Clear. He visited the land of the dead sometimes and found, eventually, his parents, or rather, found their echoes in the field of reeds, which was not the same as finding them and was also not nothing. James Potter's echo had his laugh. Lily Potter's had her eyes, and her manner, that specific quickness of someone who is 3 steps ahead but is gracious about it. He did not disturb their peace. He only visited. He returned from those visits steadier than he'd gone. Anubis noticed. Said nothing directly. Put a hand, briefly, on Harry's shoulder when he came back, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough. One evening when Harry was 15, he found Bastet on the roof of the house, which had grown over the years, sprawled and expanded, accumulated objects and plants and color the way living spaces do when people genuinely inhabit them, and sat beside her and said, "I need to know something." "Ask," she said. "Voldemort isn't dead." He said it flatly. "Not properly. Whatever he did to make himself harder to kill, he's still out there. Diminished, maybe. But not finished." He looked at her. "Isn't he?" Her ears did the thing they did when she was deciding how honest to be, a small backward tilt. "Then, we believe so." "Yes." "And the wizarding world," Harry said. "They think he's gone. They think I dealt with him when I was 1 year old." "Yes." "They think I'm a hero. They think," Bastet said carefully, "many things about you. Most of them are wrong." Harry looked at the stars. They were different here than in Little Whinging, more of them, or perhaps just more visible, in patterns that were older than the ones he'd been taught. He found Orion, which was the same everywhere. He found it comforting, that Orion was the same. "I'll have to deal with him eventually," he said. "Yes. Not now." "No." A pause. "When you're ready." Harry was quiet for a moment. The field of reeds breathed its long, sea-like breath somewhere out in the warm dark. "I'm not afraid of him," Harry said. "I should probably, I know he's supposed to be terrifying. I know what he did. He touched his scar without thinking about it, the way you touch a scar you've had long enough that it's just geography. But I'm not afraid." "No," Bastet said. "You wouldn't be. Is that a problem?" She looked at him sideways, and her amber eyes were warm and faintly amused. "A problem for whom?" He thought about it. "For him," he decided. Bastet smiled. She put her arm around his shoulders, and he leaned into it, 16 now, nearly as tall as she was, and still capable of this, of being held, because Bastet had spent 10 years systematically dismantling the idea that being held was something to be ashamed of or suspicious of. "Yes," she said, with the quiet, certain satisfaction of someone who has prepared something for a long time and can finally see the shape of its completion. "Exactly that." The stars turned overhead. In the courtyard below, Anubis was moving through a pattern of movements that was both combat training and ritual at once, his form precise and entirely without hurry, a black silhouette against the warm light of the house. Harry watched him. He watched the patience in every movement. The absolute absence of doubt. He thought about number 4, Privet Drive. About a storm. About a cat that had found him on a step and pressed warmth up through his cold hands. He thought, I am not nobody. He thought it the way you think a true thing, flatly, certainly, without needing it to be argued. The way you think 2 + 2 is 4. The way you think this is mine. He thought, I know what I am. I know who made me. And I am ready. Below, Anubis stopped his pattern and looked up at the roof, at the two of them silhouetted against the stars. Come down, he said. I want to show you something new. Harry swung his legs over the edge and dropped to the courtyard floor, 12 feet, clean and easy, landing without a sound, the way Bastet had spent 3 years teaching him to land. What is it? He asked. Anubis looked at him for a moment with those gold, depthless eyes, and something moved in them that was old and quiet and entirely specific to this boy, this moment. The last thing I know, Anubis said. That has no name in the world of the living. Harry rolled his shoulders, shook out his hands. Show me, he said. And the night, warm and ancient and full of stars, closed around them like a hand. Chapter 2, The Letter That Found No One. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. Anubis knew about it 3 days before it got there, because very little moved through the world without him knowing, not because he made an effort to track it, but because the world was porous in the way that old houses are porous, information seeping through the gaps without being asked. He knew about it the way he knew about most things, quietly, from a distance, with the unhurried attention of something that has all the time there is and therefore never rushes. He didn't mention it to Harry. Harry was in the middle of learning something that required his full concentration, a technique that had no English name, something close to what the living world called psychometry but deeper, more deliberate. The ability to touch an object and read not its history but its weight, the accumulated significance of everything it had meant to everyone who had ever held it. Anubis had been teaching it for 3 weeks, and Harry was almost there. He kept hitting the outer edge of it and then sliding off, the way you slide off a word that's on the tip of your tongue. They were sitting cross-legged on the courtyard floor across from each other, Anubis patient and still as granite, Harry with his hands wrapped around a small clay cup that had belonged, in sequence, to a potter who loved his wife, a soldier who missed his children, a priest who doubted everything, and a child who had put flowers in it once because it was pretty. Harry had worked out the potter and the soldier on his own. The priest was giving him trouble. Stop trying, Anubis said. Harry opened one eye. That's not helpful. You are using your mind. The mind is not the instrument for this. Then what is? You know what is. Harry closed his eye again. He breathed. He let the mind, that insistent, categorizing, effortful thing, step back from the wheel, and let something else take it. Something that lived further down than thought. Something that Bastet had spent years teaching him to trust, back when it said move left in a fight and the blow came from the left, back when it said this person is lying and the person was lying. The priest bloomed up through the clay like a face rising to the surface of still water. Old. Tired in a specific way, not physically tired but tired of maintaining a certainty he'd stopped feeling, the exhaustion of a performance without an audience, a faith kept up out of habit and the inability to imagine stopping. The doubt in him was enormous and private, a cathedral-sized secret he'd carried in a very small box. Harry opened both eyes. The priest, he said. He didn't believe anymore. For a long time. He just kept going. Anubis nodded. That's very sad, Harry said. It is common. Still sad. He set the cup down and rolled his shoulders. The child is easy. She was just happy about the flowers. Children usually are. Harry stood up, stretched, moved through the brief warming down movements Bastet had drilled into him after any extended period of concentrated stillness. She had opinions about what sitting cross-legged for an hour did to the hip flexors, and she was not shy about sharing them. He noticed, as he moved, that Anubis was watching him with a particular quality of attention. Not the usual reading a book kind. Something more specific. What? Harry said. Nothing. You're doing the thing where you know something and you're deciding whether to say it. A pause. I am occasionally allowed interior processes. You are. Harry dropped down from a stretch. Doesn't mean I won't notice. He looked at Anubis steadily. What is it? Anubis was quiet for a moment. Then, there is a letter coming. From a school. The magical school in Scotland that educates British witches and wizards. He said it with the even delivery he used for information he'd decided to present without editorial, which meant he had editorial, and was containing it. Harry went still. Hogwarts. You know of it. I've read about it. He'd read about a lot of things. Books had appeared in the house over the years, not always with clear explanation of where they'd come from, but Bastet had a relationship with knowledge that was acquiring and joyful in equal measure, and the library that had grown in the east wing of the house was extensive and eclectic. There were wizarding history books in it, a handful of old spell theory texts, a particularly interesting book about magical architecture that Harry had read twice. They're sending me a letter. They have been sending letters, Anubis said. This will be the 4th attempt. The previous 3 did not arrive. Harry raised an eyebrow. You intercepted them. I considered the information. A pause, honest. I wanted to think carefully before bringing this to you. Harry sat back down on the edge of the courtyard fountain, another addition, this one a deep basin with water that moved in slow, deliberate patterns and occasionally showed things if you looked at it right, and looked at the god of death with an expression that was fond and direct in equal measure. This was one of the things Bastet had given him, this ability to be direct with them without it becoming challenging, without it carrying the defensive sharpness that directness had been before. He could say you did something I want to understand without it being an accusation. You should have told me sooner, he said. Not angry. Just clear. Yes, Anubis said, which was the other thing about him, he did not dodge that kind of thing when it was said without drama. I should have. Why didn't you? The god's gold eyes held something that Harry, at 16, had enough experience reading to recognize as reluctance. Not the kind that hid wrongdoing. The kind that belonged to someone who didn't want something to begin, because beginning meant things changing. Because once you know, Anubis said, you will want to go. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Would you stop me? He asked. No. Immediate, certain. You are not a thing to be stopped. A pause. I would simply prefer that things continue as they are. Harry breathed in. He looked at the fountain. He thought about what it meant, that Anubis, who had escorted the dead since before human civilization had a name for it, who measured the weight of souls against a feather without his hand shaking, who was so vast and permanent that standing next to him sometimes felt like standing next to a mountain, that this being would rather delay a conversation because he didn't want things to change. He got up and crossed the courtyard and sat down next to Anubis on the floor and said nothing for a minute. Then he said, I'm not going anywhere. Not in the way you mean. Anubis didn't respond. Wherever I go, Harry said, this is home. You understand? That's not a thing that changes. He looked sideways at the jackal profile, the sharp ears, the absolute stillness. You're not going to lose me because I go to a school. A very long silence. The letter, Anubis said finally, will arrive tomorrow. Okay. You may want to read it before we discuss further. Okay. Harry paused. But I want to go. Just so you know. I've wanted to for a while, actually. I was trying to figure out how to bring it up. Anubis turned to look at him. You were trying to figure out how to bring it up. You're not the only one who has interior processes. Another silence, and then Anubis made the sound he occasionally made, short, quiet, the ancient equivalent of a laugh, and the tension in the courtyard dissolved like mist. Bastet was significantly less contained about it. Scotland, she said, in the tone she used when she was working herself up to an opinion. She was pacing, which was always a sign. She paced the way cats pace, not anxiously but with a coiled, deliberate energy that suggested significant quantities of thought in motion. A castle. Full of children. Managed by a wizard who has been manipulating the circumstances of your life since before you were old enough to understand what manipulation was. He's not specifically managing me from a castle full of children, Harry said. He runs a school. He also, Bastet said, stopping, placed you with those people. In that house. Deliberately. The amber eyes were very level. I have not forgiven him for that. You don't have to forgive him, Harry said reasonably. I just want to go and see what it's like. It's a castle. I've never been to a castle. We could get you a castle. This doesn't require attending an institution run by someone with dubious ethical priorities, Bastet. She stopped pacing. She looked at him, at his green eyes, at the particular set of his face that she had watched develop over 10 years into something that was specifically his, something that contained her teachings and Anubis's and the library in the East Wing and the conversations at the courtyard table and the years of spars in the morning light. I'm not a child anymore, he said. Not in the way I was. She was quiet. And I'm curious about them, he said. The wizarding world. My parents were part of it. The people who are using my name are part of it. I'd like to see it. Understand it. A pause. And there are things there that I should deal with eventually. You know there are. She did know. She had always known. That had never made it easier. If anything tries to hurt you, she started. I'll handle it. I know you'll handle it. That isn't what she stopped. She took a breath. She was, Harry had learned over years of watching, very disciplined in herself. She was fundamentally a being of instinct and force, and the discipline was something she'd built deliberately over a very long time, and it showed sometimes in the moments when instinct was stronger than discipline, in the small gap between feeling something and managing it. I'll need to know where you are, she said. At all times. You can always find me, Harry said. You always could. That hasn't changed either. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she crossed the room and cupped his face in both hands, the way she'd done since he was 6 years old, and looked at him with those amber eyes that saw everything. You are remarkable, she said. You know that. You tell me fairly regularly, he said, and smiled. She let go. She straightened. The goddess of protection and home smoothed her linen and lifted her chin and said, with the brisk practicality she deployed when she'd made a decision she intended to stand by, fine. But I'm involved in the preparation. I don't trust anyone else to, obviously, Harry said. And if that headmaster tries any of his, I'll handle it. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. The letter, when it came, arrived in the usual fashion, owl, parchment, green ink, the Hogwarts seal in red wax. It arrived at the courtyard and the owl that carried it landed on the edge of the fountain and regarded the space around it with an increasingly uncertain expression, the way animals did when the fundamental ambient energy of a place was significantly different from anything they'd encountered before. Harry took the letter. The owl accepted a piece of flatbread from the table. Bastet had been making it, which was new. She'd been teaching herself mortal cooking recently with the intense focused energy she brought to all new skills, and sat on the fountain's edge and looked significantly less stressed. Harry read the letter. It was exactly what he expected, formal, slightly archaic in phrasing, informative about what to bring. There was a supply list. He read the supply list with interest. Standard cauldron. Set of brass scales. Telescope. 1 wand. He lowered the letter. I'll need a wand, he said. We know where to get one, Anubis said. He had appeared in the courtyard archway at some point, which was simply how he moved, present or not present, with no visible transition. Ollivanders. In Diagon Alley. You've been researching. I have been aware, Anubis said, with the mild dignity of someone distinguishing between effort and passive omniscience. I'll need to look like a regular student, Harry said. Or close enough to it. I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not, but I'm also not going to make enemies before I've had a chance to get through the front door. He was already thinking about it, the shape of how to move through a space as a new, unknown quantity. Bastet had taught him this, the strategic deployment of presence. When to be fully visible and when to simply be in a room without declaring yourself. I should probably know what they know. What they expect. They expect, Bastet said from the kitchen archway, flour on her hands, a small, traumatized, underfed orphan with a famous scar and no knowledge of the magical world. A blank page. A hero who hasn't been written on yet. Harry considered this. Right, he said. So I'm going to be extremely surprising. Yes, Bastet said, with a satisfaction that was entirely feline. Can you not be happy about it in that specific tone? Anubis said. I absolutely cannot, she replied, and went back to her flatbread. 3 weeks before September 1st, someone came to find Harry. He knew she was coming before she arrived, felt her moving toward the boundary of the divine realm, which mortals couldn't typically find but which mortals of particular ability and particular determination could bump against if they were looking in roughly the right direction. She wasn't finding it so much as she'd been sent toward it, guided by magical tracing that had finally, after several years of redirected letters, managed to locate something. He mentioned this to Anubis. McGonagall, Anubis said. The deputy headmistress, Harry said. She transforms into a cat. He looked at Bastet, who was sharpening a blade in the courtyard with the efficient, meditative focus she brought to blade maintenance. You'd probably like her. I like very few cats who aren't you, Bastet said. I'm not a cat. You are remarkably cat-adjacent, she said, and did not elaborate. He went to meet McGonagall himself, which Bastet had strong feelings about, but he was calm on the matter. He wanted to go alone because he wanted to see her unmediated by his parents' presence, see how she responded to him without the context of divine beings flanking him. He crossed the boundary between the divine realm and the mortal world the way he'd been doing since he was 12, not a difficult transition, just a transition, like walking from one room to another where the air happens to be different. He found himself on a hillside in Scotland. It was early morning, grey-skied and cool, the heather very purple and very real after the divine warmth he'd stepped out of. He'd adjusted his appearance marginally, not that he looked anything other than himself, but he'd chosen clothing that was more recognizably mortal, jeans and a dark jacket, his glasses gone because he hadn't needed them since age 7. He looked, standing on the hillside, like a teenager with his hands in his pockets and green eyes that didn't quite fit the rest of the morning's color palette. McGonagall appeared 15 minutes later, which told him she'd been close and had moved quickly when she felt the boundary shift. She was exactly what he expected from everything he'd read, tall, formal, sharp-faced, the kind of woman who wore her competence visibly and found most people slightly exasperating. She was wearing robes and she held a wand at her side with the particular grip of someone who hasn't made up their mind yet what they're dealing with. She stopped when she saw him. He could see her processing. The scar, visible, as always, and the green eyes. The age, which didn't match her expectations. The absence of the frightened, overwhelmed quality she'd been sent here to find. He watched her run her eyes over him the way a professional does, quickly and thoroughly, and watched the small adjustments that happened in her face as the expected picture failed to materialize. Harry Potter, she said. Professor McGonagall, he said. I was wondering when someone would come in person. A brief pause. You knew we were looking for you. I knew letters had been sent. 4 of them. He tilted his head. Did Dumbledore send you, or did you come yourself? Another pause, longer this time. Both, she said, which he appreciated for its honesty. How is he? The headmaster is, quite well, thank you. She was still recalibrating. He could see it in the precise angle of her posture, in the way her wand hand had relaxed by approximately 3 degrees. Mr. Potter, where have you been? We have been, there has been significant concern, I've been well, he said. Better than well, really. With whom? You were placed with your relatives, I was left on a doorstep, Harry said, without heat, without drama, with the even clarity that Anubis had demonstrated was the most effective way to handle factual unpleasantness. By someone who knew what that house was like and made a choice. I left when I was 6. I've been, looked after. Since then. McGonagall's face did something complicated. Her professional expression did not crack, but there was a shift behind it, something that he read as the look of a person having a specific guilt confirmed that they had perhaps hoped would not be confirmed. Looked after by whom? She said. Harry considered her. He thought about strategy, not about lying, which wasn't something he did, but about sequencing. What to tell, in what order, to achieve maximum clarity with minimum drama. Anubis had taught him this, the truth is better served by good order than by comprehensive disclosure. Give people what they can hold. Don't overwhelm the vessel. Friends, he said. Good ones. I'm fine, Professor. Better than fine. He looked at her steadily. I'd like to come to Hogwarts. That's what I want you to take back to the headmaster. I'm interested, I'll be on the 1st of September, and I don't need rescuing or remedial anything. McGonagall stared at him. Not rudely, but the stare of a woman who is used to the world being a certain shape and has just discovered it slightly different. You're 16, she said. You've never had formal magical education. I've had an education, Harry said. It's fine. The other students will have had 5 years of, I'll manage, he said. He said it without arrogance and without false modesty and entirely without the anxious edge that most people put into reassurances to authority figures. He said it the way you say the sky is gray today, observationally, with confidence in your own observation. McGonagall looked at him for a long, considering moment. Mr. Potter, she said, are you aware that there is an ongoing situation, with Voldemort, he said. Her wand came up. He didn't move. He's not dead, Harry said. Not fully. You can put the wand down, Professor. I'm not surprised or afraid, and I'm not saying it carelessly, I'm saying it because it's accurate and pretending otherwise seems like a waste of both our time. He paused. I know about the prophecy too. I've known for a few years. McGonagall lowered her wand very slowly. He watched her processing this, the fact that he'd said Voldemort's name without flinching, the fact that he knew about the prophecy, the fact that nothing about him suggested the boy she'd been sent to find. You've known for years, she said. Yes. And you're quite calm about this. Very. She was quiet for a moment, the heather moving around them in the cool Scottish wind. Who are your guardians? She said. I need to speak with them. Harry thought about this, about the image of McGonagall sitting across a table from Anubis in the courtyard. He thought about whether that would be a good idea, a terrible idea, or, and this was the one he leaned toward, an extremely interesting idea. I'll arrange a meeting, he said. But on our terms and timeline. Can you agree to that? She looked at him again. This was a woman who had been teaching for decades, who had seen many kinds of students, who had a refined instrument for detecting things in young people that they tried to hide, arrogance, fear, grief, deception. She ran this instrument over him and found, apparently, nothing that matched her existing categories. I can agree to that, she said, with the deliberate care of someone proceeding into unfamiliar ground with their eyes open. Good. He put his hands back in his pockets. I'll be in touch. Through the school owl system is fine. He paused, because there was something in her face that deserved a response, something that was trying hard to be professional and was not entirely succeeding, something that looked like it was standing close to an emotion it was working to contain. "I knew your parents," McGonagall said, abruptly. "Your mother she was one of the finest students I ever taught. Your father was," she stopped. "I'm very glad," she said, more carefully, "that you've been well." Harry looked at her. He thought about Lily Potter in the Field of Reeds, the echo of her laugh. He thought about what it meant to have been loved by someone before you could remember being loved. "Thank you," he said. "For what it's worth, they were happy. Where they are." He said it plainly, as simple information. "I know that for certain." McGonagall went very still. Her jaw moved once. Then she straightened and became, again, wholly professional, which was its own kind of courage. "September 1st, she said. King's Cross Station. Platform 9 3/4. "I might arrive differently," he said. She absorbed this. "I'll inform the groundskeeper to expect, don't worry him about it," Harry said. "I'll find my way in. I'm good at that." He went to Diagon Alley 10 days before September 1st. He went alone, which Bastet had opinions about and which Anubis permitted with the particular quality of silence that meant he trusted Harry's judgment. He arrived through a narrow alley behind the leaky cauldron, not through the pub itself, just adjacent to the magical boundary, stepping through it the way you step through a bead curtain, a moment of transition and then there it was. Diagon Alley was extraordinary. He knew this, had read about it, had even seen it in fragments when he'd walked the boundary of the mortal world with Anubis, but knowing and seeing were different things. It was loud and crowded and smelled of potions, ingredients and hot sugar and old parchment and animals, and every shop window contained something impossible in the cheerful, matter-of-fact way that the magical world seemed to handle the impossible, as though levitating cauldrons and living portraits were simply items on the inventory list. He moved through it with the easy, attentive stride Bastet had given him, present everywhere, visible nowhere in particular, reading the space with his whole body and not just his eyes. He bought his books first, which took a while because he stood in flourish and blots and read the first 3 chapters of the Standard Book of Spells Level 1 and found it interesting for about 4 minutes and then found himself reading something he discovered in the back of the shop about advanced magical theory that was actually engaging. He bought that too. He bought his potion supplies. He bought his scales. He found, to his genuine delight, an astronomical instruments shop where a small, precise man with ink-stained fingers talked to him for 40 minutes about the magical properties of brass, and Harry asked questions that made the man increasingly animated and eventually resulted in a discount he hadn't asked for. Then he went to Ollivander's. The shop was narrow and dim and smelled of sawdust and something older, something that had been building up in the wood of the walls for centuries. A small bell announced him. Nothing happened for a moment. Then a man appeared from somewhere in the shelves, and he was the kind of man you noticed immediately, not because of any single remarkable feature but because of the way all his features added together into something that seemed to be made of concentrated attention. Garrick Ollivander looked at Harry, and Harry felt the familiar sensation of being read, but this was different from Anubis's reading, different in the way that a candle is different from the sun. Both were light. The scale was simply not comparable. "Harry Potter," Ollivander said. "Garrick Ollivander," Harry said, which seemed to catch the man slightly off guard. People didn't usually, Harry gathered, say his name back to him. "I wondered when I'd be seeing you." He moved closer, his pale eyes moving over Harry with that measuring intensity. "And what I'd find when I did." He tilted his head. "You're not what I expected." "I've been told that today already," Harry said. He wasn't unfriendly, this man was interesting, in the way that very old knowledge stored in a human body is interesting. "What did you expect?" "Something more, unfinished," Ollivander said. "You have been trained." "Yes." "Not by anyone currently living," he said. He said it as a statement. The pale eyes were very sharp. Harry didn't confirm or deny. He simply waited, which was the answer, and Ollivander was clearly intelligent enough to read it. "Well." The wand-maker turned, moving with brisk purposefulness into the shelves. Let us see what chooses you, then. The process was familiar from what he'd read: measure, try, reject, try again. The first 8 wands he tried either did nothing or snapped at him with a crackling recoil that made Ollivander snatch them back with a faintly offended expression. Harry wasn't frustrated by this. He was curious about it, running his attention over each wand as he held it, trying to feel what the wand maker was feeling. The 9th wand was holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, and when he wrapped his hand around it there was a warmth that was recognizable, not identical, but recognizable, the way a voice you know sounds different on the telephone and you still know whose it is. Gold sparks ran from the end of it and climbed toward the ceiling like a brief, ascending calligraphy. Ollivander looked at the sparks. He looked at Harry. His expression was extraordinary, not frightened, but in the presence of something he was working to hold correctly. Holly and phoenix feather, he said, quietly. 11 inches, nice and supple. And it has a brother. He paused. Its brother gave you that scar. I know, Harry said. He looked at the wand in his hand. The warmth of it was genuine and specific, not his usual power, not what Bastet had trained and refined, but something adjacent to it, something that was reaching toward him the way a hand reaches in a crowd. It wants to be used. Yes, Ollivander said. It has been waiting a long time. His pale eyes were still doing their measuring thing, but there was something else in them now, the look of a man who has made things for a very long time and knows the difference between a tool and a calling. The phoenix whose tail feather is in this wand, there is only one other. The wand that killed your parents. I know, Harry said again. He was holding the holly wand and feeling what it wanted, not feeling subservient to it, but in dialogue with it, the way you are in dialogue with something that has intelligence and intent of its own. It's all right, he told it, not quite aloud. More like a thought he let the wand feel rather than a thing he said. I know what you are. You're not defined by what your brother did. Neither am I. The wand's warmth pulsed once, steady and clear. Ollivander said nothing for a long moment. He was, Harry thought, a man who had seen a lot of witches and wizards choose and be chosen by wands, and he seemed to be experiencing something he wasn't sure he had a category for. I wonder, Ollivander said softly, what it will mean. That the two of you have found each other. Something interesting, probably, Harry said. He set the wand down on the counter. How much do I owe you? He brought the wand home. Anubis examined it without touching it, circling it the way he circled all things he was deciding about. The brother wand, he said. Not a question. Yes. You are not troubled by it. No, Harry said. He picked it up again. It chose me. It's been waiting. Whatever its brother was used for, that's not what this one is. He turned it in his fingers. Besides, I know what Voldemort is made of. What I'm made of is different. Anubis looked at him for a moment. What are you made of, do you think? Harry thought about it seriously, the way he thought about the things Anubis asked him, as genuine questions deserving genuine consideration, not rhetorical gestures. Good things, he said finally. I think. He looked at the wand. My mum's love. Your patience. Bastet's, everything. 10 years of being somewhere that wanted me. He paused. I think I'm made of all of that. He looked up. And I think that's enough for what's coming. Anubis was very still. Then he said, with the slow precision of someone choosing their words from a large and ancient vocabulary, it is more than enough. Harry set the wand down on the table beside his mother's photograph. He looked at the two objects next to each other, the wand that matched the one that had killed her, and her face, laughing, unaware of what was coming. He thought, I'll take care of it. Both of you. He thought it at the photograph and at the wand equally, and at something that was maybe the memory of warmth and red hair that was the oldest thing he could remember, and at everything it meant to carry someone with you even when they were gone. Then he went to find Bastet, who was still making flatbread and who had been, he was fairly certain, in the kitchen for the past 3 hours on the basis that being in the kitchen meant she was busy and didn't have to have her feelings about September 1st. "I'm going to need you to help me pack," he said. She did not look up from the dough. "I know. And I need to know that you're okay." She was quiet for a moment. The bread making continued, rhythmic and deliberate. "I am," she said. "I will be." She glanced up briefly, her amber eyes direct and warm and complicated. "You are going to be magnificent," she said. "And I am going to worry every second of every day regardless." "That's fair," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "It absolutely is." September 1st arrived clear and gold, the particular gold of summer ending well. Harry stood in the courtyard in the early morning with his trunk, packed by Bastet, which meant it contained everything he'd asked for and several things he hadn't, including the wool blanket he'd had since he was 6, which had appeared at the bottom neatly folded, and looked at the house. The herbs in the clay pot. The books by the door. The game board on the stone table. Anubis stood in the archway. Harry looked at him. He thought about trying to say what he felt and decided that it was too large for words and that Anubis would know anyway, because Anubis always knew, because that was who he was. Instead he crossed the courtyard and wrapped both arms around the god of death, and held on. It took Anubis approximately 1 second to respond, which was approximately 1 second longer than it took Bastet, who responded immediately and held tight, and for a moment all three of them stood in the courtyard of the house at the edge of the afterlife, and nobody said anything, and it was enough. "All right," Harry said. "We know," Bastet said into his hair. He stepped back. He looked at them. He picked up his trunk. "I'll see you soon," he said. He walked toward the boundary, and the gold morning opened up around him like a door, and he went through it. Chapter 3, The Boy Who Walked in the Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock sharp, as it always had, as it always would, a scarlet engine breathing steam into the September morning with the punctual certainty of tradition. Platform 9 3/4 smelled of coal smoke and chocolate frogs and the particular excited anxiety of several hundred young people standing at the beginning of something. Harry wasn't on the train. He'd considered it. He'd stood outside the barrier at King's Cross for about 4 minutes, watching families pass through it in clusters, mothers with last-minute instructions, fathers carrying trunks, younger siblings pressing their noses to the barrier after older ones vanished, and he'd thought about it seriously, the way he thought about most things. The train ride was 5 hours. 5 hours of enclosed space with people who would recognize his name and have strong preformed opinions about who he was and what he should be, before he'd had a chance to establish any version of himself at all. He decided against the train. Instead he arrived at Hogwarts the way he arrived most places, directly, through the fold between his world and this one, stepping out of the warm dark of divine space and into the cool Scottish evening with his trunk settling beside him on the grass as if it had always been there. He appeared at the edge of the grounds, outside the main wards, because walking through someone else's protections uninvited seemed rude. He stood for a moment and breathed in the smell of the place, old stone, lake water, something herbal from the greenhouses, and under all of it the deep, geological permanence of a building that had been standing for 1,000 years and intended to keep standing. He looked up at the castle. It was extraordinary in the way that only things built with genuine love and genuine magic are extraordinary, not just the scale of it, though the scale was impressive, but the feeling it put out, the way it sat in the landscape as though the landscape had grown up around it rather than the other way around. He felt the magic in the stones from where he was standing, layered and complex, 1,000 years of accumulated spellwork that had taken on a kind of organic quality, the way a garden becomes after long enough and what grows in it shapes the ground. He liked it immediately. He walked up to the main gates, which were closed. He looked at them. He could have gone through the way Bastet went through walls, but he chose instead to knock, the way you knock when you've decided to be polite about things, and then stood back and waited. The gates opened after a minute. On the other side stood a man who was enormous in the specific way that some people are enormous, not just tall or wide but large, filling more space than could be strictly accounted for by simple dimensions, with a beard that contained several things including what appeared to be a piece of twig. His eyes, when they found Harry, went through an extremely rapid sequence of emotions that included surprise, recognition, and an overwhelming warmth that arrived so fast it was like walking into a wall of feeling. "Blimey," Rubeus Hagrid said. "Harry Potter." "Hello," Harry said. "You must be Hagrid." How did you?" He stopped. He looked at Harry with eyes that were doing the same thing McGonagall's had done, running the expected picture against the actual one and finding the gap disconcerting. Then the overwhelming warmth won, completely, and he bent down, quite a considerable distance, and looked at Harry's face with an emotion so open and unguarded that it hit Harry somewhere specific, the part of him that could read feeling the way he read the weight of objects. This man had known his parents. This man had carried him as a baby. This man was, in some uncomplicated and total way, simply glad he was alive. "It's good to meet you," Harry said, and meant it. Hagrid made a sound that might have been words and might have been something wordless. He straightened up fast and rubbed his face with one enormous hand. "Right," he said. "Right. Professor McGonagall said you might come differently. I'm to take you up to the castle for the sorting." He looked at Harry's trunk. He looked at Harry. He looked at the trunk again. "How did you? It's a long story," Harry said. "I'll tell you sometime, if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Hagrid said, with the simplicity of someone who means exactly what they say. They walked up to the castle together, Hagrid adjusting his stride to something Harry could match, though Harry walked faster than most people expected, and after the first minute Hagrid stopped adjusting and just walked normally, which Harry kept up with easily. They talked. Hagrid asked careful, gentle questions. Where had he been? Had he been well? Was he? And Harry answered honestly in the way he'd decided to answer honestly about everything, which was plainly and without drama, and which Hagrid received with the careful respect of someone who was moved but didn't want to make someone else carry his feelings. "Your parents," Hagrid said at one point, voice dropping, "were wonderful people." "I know," Harry said. "I've met them. Sort of." He watched Hagrid absorb this. "It's complicated. But they're at peace. I know that for certain." Hagrid was quiet for a few steps. His voice was rough. "That's good. That's really good, Harry." Harry nodded. They arrived at the castle entrance ahead of the boats, ahead of the first years. Harry had appeared early enough that there was a comfortable window. McGonagall was waiting in the entrance hall with the particular posture of a woman who has made her peace with the unusual. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Professor." He looked around the entrance hall, the torches, the stone, the floating quality of the light that came from no specific direction. He felt the magic of the place more strongly here, close and layered. "It's a good building," he said. McGonagall's professional expression twitched. "It is," she agreed. "I'll take you to wait with the first years for the sorting. You'll be sorted with them." A pause. "I need to prepare you, your name is well known. There will be a reaction." "I expected that," Harry said. "It may be significant." "That's fine," he said. "I know who I am." She looked at him, and again that private recalibration happened behind her eyes. "Very well." She turned. "Follow me." He waited in the small antechamber off the great hall with 43 11-year-olds who were nervous in 43 slightly different ways. They'd arrived from the boats, damp and wide-eyed, and discovered Harry already standing in the corner of the room with his hands in his pockets and his trunk presumably somewhere else. McGonagall had taken it, and they were staring at him the way young children stare at things that don't fit their understanding of the current situation. A small girl with bushy hair and a book held to her chest was staring at him with the specific intensity of someone who has a question they're working up to. "You're Harry Potter," she said finally. "Yes," he said. "You're supposed to be 11. "I missed a few years," he said. She blinked. She processed this. She looked at him again, clearly running some internal calculation. "You weren't at primary school with any of us." I asked, and nobody had met you before, and there are only supposed to be 43 of us, but there were 44 names on the list that Professor Flitwick showed me by accident. Hermione, hissed a red-haired boy beside her. I'm just pointing out, you're doing the thing again. It's a reasonable observation. I'm Harry, Harry said to both of them. What are your names? The girl, Hermione, apparently, straightened. Hermione Granger. The red-haired boy, who was tall and had a smudge of something on his nose and the kind of face that was trying to be casual about something it found extremely exciting, Ron Weasley. Harry looked at him. Any relation to the family at? He thought about what Bastet had told him about the wizarding world, the landscape of families and connections. The Burrow? Ron's eyebrows went up. That's us. How'd you know about the Burrow? I read a lot, Harry said. Your family is well known. In good ways, he added, because Ron's expression had gone briefly uncertain in the manner of someone who wasn't sure which kind of well-known he meant. Ron's face opened up into a grin that was uncomplicated and immediate, like a window being thrown open. Brilliant, he said. Are you really Harry Potter? Like, really really? Really really, Harry confirmed. Hermione Granger looked at Harry with the evaluating interest of someone who has already decided he's more interesting than expected and is now deciding how interested to be. You've missed 5 years of education, she said. That's a significant gap. Hermione, Ron started. It's a fair point, Harry said. I haven't missed the education. Just this specific education. He met her eyes. I think I'll manage. She held his gaze for a moment, clearly deciding something. Then she gave a small nod, the precise nod of someone extending provisional respect on the basis of available evidence. We'll see, she said, which from Hermione Granger, he would come to understand, was essentially a warm welcome. The door to the great hall opened. McGonagall's voice, form a line, please. The hall hit him in a wave, 400 students, candlelight from thousands of floating flames, for long tables and house colors, the ceiling open to the October sky, stars already coming out in the early dark. He took it in without breaking stride because Bastet had taught him to take things in while moving, to process your environment while maintaining your direction, to never stop being yourself because a situation is impressive. He noticed the moment the hall noticed him. It started at the Gryffindor table and rippled outward, the way a stone ripples water, a head turning, then another, then a whisper, his name moving through the room in fragments, and then the sound of the hall changed, 400 people shifting from the settled noise of waiting to the loaded noise of recognition. He kept walking. His face was calm. His hands were in his pockets. Ron, 2 people behind him in the line, said quietly, "Blimey." "Stop saying blimey," Hermione whispered. "I'll stop saying it when things stop being blimey-worthy, which isn't today." The sorting began. The hat sang. Harry listened to it with genuine interest, finding the song better than he'd expected from a hat, which was a low bar but still. Names were called. First years sat, trembled, were sorted, ran to tables. The energy of the room was divided between the proceedings and him, and he let it be divided because the first years deserved their moment. Granger, Hermione. She sat. The hat thought for approximately 30 seconds, which seemed to pain it slightly, as though it was being made to choose between 2 entirely valid things. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table made noise. Hermione sat down with the look of someone who has won an argument. Weasley, Ronald. Ron sat with the hat barely on his head before it shouted, Gryffindor, with what felt like personal enthusiasm, and the table erupted, which Harry gathered meant they'd been expecting it, another Weasley, another Gryffindor, a foregone conclusion greeted with genuine warmth regardless. Then, Potter, Harry. The hall went entirely silent. Not the polite pause before applause silence. The deep silence of 400 people holding their breath at the same time. Harry walked forward from the line and sat on the stool with the ease of someone who has sat in stranger places than an enchanted chair in a dining hall, and McGonagall placed the hat on his head. It dropped over his eyes. The inside was dark and smelled of dust and something that was either old magic or old wool. A voice, dry and ancient and deeply amused, "Well. This is new." "Hello," Harry said. Not aloud, internally, in the way you talked to something that was reading your mind, which was simply a matter of directing your thought rather than your voice. "I have been doing this for 1012 years, the hat said, and I have never felt, what is that? What does it feel like?" Harry asked, genuinely curious. "Like standing at the edge of something very large in the dark," the hat said. "You have been, you are not, this is not ordinary magic training." A pause that felt like someone leafing through a very long document very quickly. "Oh. Oh, that is, I see. Well. Which house?" Harry asked. He had views on this himself, had been thinking about it since the antechamber. "I should be asking you that," the hat said. "You could go anywhere. You know that. Ravenclaw would value what you know. Slytherin would value what you're capable of. Hufflepuff, a pause. You are remarkably loyal. Did you know that? It's almost the first thing. Yes, that's interesting." "Gryffindor," Harry said. "You already knew." "I wanted to see what you'd say," Harry said. The hat made a sound that was absolutely a laugh. "Your mother was Gryffindor. Your father was Gryffindor. But that's not why you want it." It was a statement. "No," Harry agreed. "I want it because the things I care about, the courage, the directness, those are mine. Not inherited. Mine." "Gryffindor," the hat announced, loudly and with what he felt was a specific personal satisfaction. The great hall went from silence to an explosion of sound with no middle space. The Gryffindor table came to their feet, which Harry gathered was not standard procedure, and the noise of it bounced off the ceiling and came back. He pulled the hat off his head and handed it back to McGonagall, whose expression was, for one unguarded moment, something very like relief. He walked to the Gryffindor table. The students made room the way they make room for someone they're not sure what to do with, and he sat down between Ron, who had saved him a seat with the unceremonious decisiveness of someone who'd already made up his mind, and Hermione, who had done the same on the other side and was pretending she hadn't. "How was the hat?" Ron said. "Interesting," Harry said. "We had a conversation." "A conversation," Hermione said. "You had a conversation with the Sorting Hat. It's very intelligent, actually. You didn't find it interesting?" Yes, actually." She looked slightly thrown. "Most people don't describe it that way. Most people are nervous," Harry said. "I wasn't." He looked down the table. He noticed the stares, the whispers still circling. He noticed a blond boy at the Slytherin table watching him with an expression that was trying to be contemptuous and was coming out as confused. He looked at the head table, professors, varied in age and energy, some watching him with professional interest, one watching him with the particular intensity of someone looking at a problem they haven't solved yet, a slight man in a purple turban whose attention felt strange, a quality to it that Harry filed away without reacting to. And at the center of the table, an old man with silver hair and half-moon spectacles and the deep, patient face of someone who has lived long enough to find most situations interesting rather than alarming. Albus Dumbledore was looking at him with an expression that contained many things simultaneously: surprise, assessment, something that was almost wonder, and below all of that, something more careful. The face of a man revising a plan in real time. Harry met his eyes. He didn't smile. He wasn't hostile. He was simply present, honest, clearly himself, which was its own kind of message and which the headmaster received it, he could tell, with the complete attention of a very intelligent person who has just realized they're dealing with something outside their existing models. He looked away first, which meant nothing and which he'd done because the food had appeared and he was hungry. "You looked at Dumbledore like that on purpose," Hermione said quietly beside him. "Like what?" Harry said. "Like you already knew him. Like, I don't know. Like you weren't impressed. I have a lot of respect for him, Harry said. Respect and impressed aren't the same thing. She was quiet for a second. Then, no. I suppose they're not. She reached for a serving dish. How are you really going to manage the coursework? I'm not being dismissive. I'm asking practically. Let me show you before you worry, he said. That's not how I operate, she said. I know, he said. You'll find out anyway. Ron, mouthful of chicken, I like him. Ron, Hermione said. I'm just saying. The common room afterward was warm and red and full of the particular energy of a first night, everyone still riding the high of arrival, the older students performing casual familiarity for the first years performing composure for each other. Harry sat in an armchair by the fire and let the room move around him and thought about the purple turban professor. Ron dropped into the chair opposite. Who've you been staring at? Quirrell, Harry said. Defense against the dark arts. Yeah, he's supposed to be rubbish, actually. Percy says, that's my brother Percy, he's a prefect. Percy says he came back from wherever he went on sabbatical smelling of garlic and being weird. He's more than weird, Harry said. Ron looked at him. What do you mean? Harry considered how much to say and decided on enough. There's something on him. Something that doesn't belong to him. He met Ron's eyes. I don't know the exact shape of it yet. But something's wrong. Ron stared at him. You got all that from looking at him at dinner. I'm observant. Yeah, okay. Ron leaned forward, dropping his voice with the instinctive conspiracy of someone who finds a mystery irresistible. What kind of something? Like, cursed something? Something older than cursed, Harry said. Then he looked at Ron's face, the genuine interest, the open expression, the complete absence of the performative coolness that a lot of teenagers his age were already sporting, and made a quiet, internal decision about this person. I'll tell you more when I know more, he said. If you want. Obviously I want, Ron said. That's not even a question. Hermione appeared, having been introduced to approximately everyone who tried to introduce themselves to her, and sat on the arm of the nearest chair with her book. Quirrell is the defense professor, she said. He seems underqualified based on his published academic record, which is publicly available if you know where to look. His published academic record, Ron said. I looked into the staff before coming, she said, without embarrassment. Preparation is not a character flaw. I agree with that completely, Harry said, and she looked pleased in the particular way she looked when agreement was unexpected and therefore more valuable. You think something's wrong with him, she said. It wasn't a question. I noticed you looking at the head table, Harry said. His turban is too big, she said. I thought he seemed uncomfortable. Like someone who has something they're hiding and are managing very hard. She paused. I thought I was being uncharitable. You weren't, Harry said. The fire crackled. Around them the common room gradually wound down, students drifting toward the dormitory staircases, voices going quieter. Harry looked at the fire and thought about Quirrell's turban and what was under it, because he knew, not in the way he knew things he'd researched, but in the way his compass tilted, the Bastet Anubis had given him, the instrument that pointed toward truth and toward imbalance. The thing on Quirrell was an imbalance so fundamental it was almost loud. He knew what Voldemort diminished looked like, because Anubis had taught him. A soul that had divided itself, that had cut away pieces of its own weight to escape death, was not a lesser version of a soul. It was something qualitatively different, a broken thing with broken gravity, pulling on the world wrong. He breathed in and set it aside for now. There was time. There was always time, if you didn't panic about it. So, Ron said, in the tone of someone changing the subject to something he'd been waiting to bring up. I have to ask. The sorting. The whole room stood up. Does that happen to you everywhere you go? No, Harry said. But today was a particular context. how are you that calm about it? If that had happened to me I don't know. Gone red and knocked something over. Ron, Hermione said. I'm being honest, he said. It's a reasonable question, Harry said. I suppose, I know who I am. The room reacting doesn't change that. He looked at Ron. It doesn't change who you are either, when it doesn't happen. Ron blinked. Right, he said slowly. Yeah. And then, quietly, in the voice of someone who has had a small, private realization, yeah. Draco Malfoy found him the next morning. This was predictable. Harry had been half expecting it. He'd watched the Slytherin table at dinner, watched the blonde boy's confusion crystallizing into something more like strategy as the evening went on, watched him decide that the approach would come when it could be made to look natural rather than when it was obviously an approach. He found Harry alone in the corridor on the way to Transfiguration, which wasn't quite alone because Harry was never quite alone. His awareness of space and the people in it was constant and peripheral, running in the background like breathing, but alone enough. Potter, Malfoy said. Harry stopped. He turned. He looked at Draco Malfoy with complete, unhurried attention. He was a boy performing several things at once, confidence, ease, social superiority, and performing them with the energy of someone who practiced them because they were important to him, which meant they were possibly compensating for something, which made them automatic rather than real. Harry read all of this in about 2 seconds and set it aside and simply looked at the person, which was, a boy his age, sharp-faced, pale, with very good shoes and an anxious quality he was working to hide. Malfoy, Harry said. Draco seemed thrown by the immediate recognition. He recovered quickly. I wanted to introduce myself. I think we got off on the wrong foot at dinner, not speaking. We didn't speak at dinner, Harry said. There's no wrong foot from not speaking. Well. I'm extending a hand. He extended one, literally, which was either genuine or theater. Harry shook it, because not shaking it was pointlessly rude and he wasn't interested in being pointlessly rude. Extended, Harry said. What did you want to say? Another small throw. He'd expected either warmth or hostility, Harry guessed, not this even, patient attention that gave him nothing to push against. I wanted to say, there are people in this school worth knowing and people not worth knowing. The company you've been keeping, is good company, Harry said. I've made that decision already. The Weasleys are, my friends, Harry said. Ron and Hermione. Already decided. He said it the way he said most things, without aggression, without the need to be agreed with, simply as a statement of fact that was not up for renegotiation. Malfoy's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're walking into. This school has, he stopped. He was recalculating, Harry could see it, the script that hadn't worked being replaced by something more improvised. You've been away, he tried. There are things you don't know about how things work here. You're not wrong about that, Harry said. But I'm good at learning. He looked at Malfoy steadily. I don't think you're a bad person, he said. Which was true, which was the thing Anubis had taught him, way accurately, not conveniently. I think you've been taught certain things and you're working out how much of it you actually believe. That's your work to do, not mine. He paused. But if you want to be civil, I'm completely willing to be civil. I'm not interested in enemies for their own sake. Malfoy stared at him. For one unguarded moment his face was simply the face of a 16-year-old boy who had not expected any of this conversation. Right, he said. He sounded slightly winded. Right, Harry agreed, and walked past him to Transfiguration. McGonagall's class was extraordinary and Harry said so, which appeared to surprise her. She transformed her desk into a pig and back again as a demonstration, clean, precise, the magic in it was beautiful, the kind of elegant spellwork that had been practiced so many times it had become something like muscle memory, fluid and confident. Most of the students were writing this down. Harry was watching it the way you watch something that is excellent and that you want to understand from the inside. Mr. Potter, McGonagall said. As the class's oldest student, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate what you remember from prior magical education. Or confirm its absence, as the case may be. The class went quiet with the anticipatory tension of students watching someone be put on the spot. Harry looked at the matchstick on the desk in front of him. He looked at it with the understanding of what it was: wood, cellulose, the particular dense structure of a thing that had been part of something living. He thought about what a needle was: metal, drawn out, fine, a different density, a different arrangement. He thought about what it meant to ask one thing to become another. He didn't use the wand. He used it as the conduit it was meant to be, the way Bastet had taught him: direct the intent through the instrument, don't let the instrument lead. The matchstick became a needle, not in stages but all at once, the way it happens when the magic is certain, metal, gleaming, perfect. McGonagall picked it up. She turned it between her fingers. It was flawless. She set it down. She looked at Harry with an expression that was professionally neutral in the way that extremely professional people are professionally neutral when they need a moment. 5 points to Gryffindor, she said. For impeccable technique. She moved on. Hermione leaned over. You didn't say an incantation. I don't usually, Harry said. You're not supposed to be able to do that without, I know, he said. She looked at him. She looked at his matchstick now needle. She looked back at him with the expression she would give him many times over the coming months, which was the expression of someone who has filed a question for later processing and intends to come back to it thoroughly. Later, she said. Later, he agreed. Ron, on his other side, was still trying to make his matchstick do anything at all. Could you? No, forget it. That's embarrassing to even ask. Want help? Harry said. Yeah, actually. You're doing it in the wrong order, Harry said quietly, leaning over. You're thinking about the needle first. Think about the matchstick. Know exactly what it is before you ask it to change. Ron looked at him. He looked at the matchstick. He looked at it in the way Harry had described, not as a prop for a trick, but as a thing that existed, that had specific qualities, that he was asking something of. The matchstick twitched. Went silver at the tip. Blimey, Ron breathed. There it is, Harry said. The days settled into something that felt, to Harry's genuine surprise, like rhythm. He'd expected Hogwarts to feel foreign and it did, but it also felt oddly comfortable in the way that places with deep magic feel comfortable to people who are accustomed to deep magic. The castle had its own warmth, its own presence, and he and it were working each other out the way two entities do when they're trying to establish terms. He was ahead in ways that would have been more disruptive if he'd been interested in performing his capability, which he wasn't. He answered when asked, helped when help was wanted, and spent the rest of his attention on actually learning the specific vocabulary of wand-based magic, which was genuinely different from what he knew and therefore genuinely interesting. It was like learning a second language when you already spoke a first one fluently. The grammar was different, the sounds were different, but the underlying thing being communicated was the same. He was aware of Quirrell in every class they shared. The wrongness on the man was consistent and specific, not growing, not retreating, just present, a steady low vibration of imbalance that his compass registered the way a compass registers north. He said nothing yet. He was collecting information. He wrote to Anubis on the 6th evening, sitting in the common room after everyone else had gone up. He wrote on plain paper rather than parchment, which seemed to confuse the school owls, but they delivered it anyway, because owls are fundamentally pragmatic. The school is good. The magic here is different from ours, more structured, more rigid in some ways, more elegant in others. I'm learning it properly rather than just running my own over it. There are two people here I think you'd like. Ron is honest in the way that straightforward people are honest, not because they've thought about honesty but because deception requires effort they don't want to spend. Hermione thinks like you, actually, carefully, thoroughly, with a strong bias toward truth and a tendency to be irritated by those who don't share it. There's something on Quirrell. You know what I mean. I'm watching. The castle knows I'm here in the way old things know things. It's been adjusting slightly. I think we're becoming acquainted. Tell Bastet I'm eating. He sealed it and sent it and looked at the fire for a while, and thought about Quirrell, and thought about the third-floor corridor that Dumbledore had specifically mentioned in his opening speech, announced as forbidden, with the transparent reverse psychology of someone who is hiding something and needs it not to be found. He hadn't gone near it. But he knew what was there, broadly, because he'd been paying attention to the architecture of the school's magical layers, and there was something on the third floor that had a different quality from everything else, something placed, something contained, something that was not native to the building. Something being protected. He stared at the fire. He thought about Voldemort on the back of a human head. He thought about what Voldemort, diminished and desperate, would want most in the world. Oh, he thought. He thought it the way you think things when you've put 2 and 2 together and gotten a sum that you should have reached earlier and would have, except you've been giving yourself time to settle in. He sat with the answer for a moment, the clean clarity of it, and felt the situation take shape around him. Quirrell, the third floor, a stone that could restore a destroyed body to life. He thought, right then. He thought, I should tell Dumbledore. He thought, I should see the man before I report to him. He got up and went to bed, and he slept well, which was something he'd always done, a gift from 10 years in a place where the dark was nothing to be afraid of because the god of death lived in it. He dreamed about his mother's laugh. 3 days later, Dumbledore's office. He'd requested the meeting through McGonagall, who had arranged it with the expression of someone facilitating something she had a lot of feelings about and was choosing to process privately. The office was exactly what a very old, very intelligent person's office looked like, accumulated and specific, nothing random, everything significant, the shelves of it telling the story of a person who had spent a long time being interested in the world. Instruments Harry didn't recognize. Portraits of former headmasters who watched him with the avid attention of paintings that had been waiting for something interesting to look at. Dumbledore sat behind his desk. He was different up close from what Harry had observed at the head table, still vast in the way that people of genuine depth are vast, still warm in the specific way of someone who has spent their life practicing warmth, but more worn. More specifically tired. The tired of a man carrying something heavy for a very long time. A bird sat on a perch behind him, brilliant red, which turned one dark eye on Harry with the focused attention of a living thing recognizing another living thing. Harry, Dumbledore said. He did not say Mr. Potter, which was a choice, deliberately informal. Please, sit down. Harry sat. He looked at Dumbledore and let himself be looked at. I have been wanting to speak with you since September 1st, Dumbledore said. If I am honest, I have been wanting to speak with you since considerably before that. His blue eyes were doing the thing that very perceptive people's eyes do when they're in the presence of something they can't quite classify, alert, open, moving between points. You are not what I expected. People keep telling me that, Harry said. What did you expect? A pause that was honest in the way that Dumbledore's pauses often were. He didn't use them to deflect, only to actually consider. Something more, raw, he said. Something that needed more shaping. And instead, Dumbledore said, with something that was nearly wonder, something already shaped. Very thoroughly. He folded his hands on the desk. May I ask by whom? Friends, Harry said. Powerful ones. Good ones. He met the blue eyes. You don't need to know more than that yet. I'll tell you when I trust you more. A very long pause. Most people would have been offended by that. Dumbledore absorbed it with the specific grace of someone who finds honesty bracing rather than offensive. Fair, he said. That is, entirely fair. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the prophecy, I know about it, Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. You know, I've known for years, Harry said. I've had time to think about it. Make my peace with it. He looked at the old man directly. I'm not going to be your weapon, if that's what you're thinking. I'm going to do what I decide to do, for reasons I decide on. If those reasons align with what you need, we'll work together. If they don't, we won't. The portraits on the walls had stopped pretending to sleep. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Long enough that the silence had real weight to it. Then something shifted in his face, the plan that had been running in his eyes since September 1st adjusting, recalibrating, becoming something different from what it had been. There's something on the third floor, Harry said. Something you put there to be found. And Quirrell is going to try for it. He paused. I'm telling you this because you should know I know. Not because I need you to handle it. Dumbledore's expression moved through surprise and landed on a complicated respect. You are quite extraordinary, he said softly. I've been told that too, Harry said. I believe it more from some people than others. He stood. I'll let you know if anything changes. He walked out. Behind him, a portrait, Phineas Nigellus Black, asleep for 40 years, opened one eye and said, to no one in particular, well. Hogwarts just got interesting. Chapter 4, The Jackal's Fury. The owls came at midnight. Not school owls, these were different, ink-black and silent, moving through the night without the soft feathered sound of normal wings, their flight paths geometric in a way that no natural bird flew. There were 7 of them, and they arrived at Hogwarts from 7 different directions at precisely the same moment, carrying nothing, which was the point. They weren't messengers. They were signals. Harry was awake. He'd been awake for an hour, sitting cross-legged on his bed in the dark with his eyes open and his attention spread wide, the way Anubis had taught him to spread it, not focused on any one thing but receiving everything, the castle's magical signature shifting like a tide he was floating in. He'd felt the change begin around 11, a slow pressurizing of the air, the way the atmosphere changes before a storm you can feel before you can see. He'd also felt Quirrell leave the dungeons. Not heard, felt. The wrongness on the man was a specific frequency and Harry had been tracking it since September, the way you track a sound you've learned to recognize, and when it moved through the castle's lower levels with unusual speed and purpose at 11:15, he was out of bed before the thought had fully formed. He pulled on his jacket. He picked up his wand from the nightstand and slid it into his jacket's inner pocket, where Bastet had helped him sew a specific loop for it 3 weeks ago in a letter exchange that had involved a detailed diagram on her part and a willingness to sew on his. He rolled his neck once. He looked at Ron's closed curtains. He made a decision, revisited it, made it again. Ron, he said. A muffled sound. Then a head appeared. Wah, get up. Something's happening. Ron was out of bed in 10 seconds, which told Harry something significant about him. He didn't ask questions first, he moved, and the questions came while moving. He was already pulling on his shoes when he said, what kind of something? Quirrell's heading for the 3rd floor. Ron went still for 1 second. Right now. Right now. They woke Hermione by knocking on the door of the girls' dormitory, which she answered in approximately 30 seconds, looking unreasonably alert for midnight, with her hair and a small beaded bag she apparently took everywhere. She took one look at Harry's face and said, Quirrell. Yes, Harry said. I've been watching him, she said. There's a troll somewhere in this castle. I heard it earlier, the sound, through the floor. Something enormous and stupid moving around in the dungeons. I was going to tell you in the morning. There's a troll, Ron said. A distraction, Harry said. Something to keep the staff occupied and away from the 3rd floor. He was already moving toward the portrait hole. Someone already told Dumbledore about Quirrell. I'm not sure he believed me enough or moved fast enough. You told Dumbledore? Hermione said, following. 2 weeks ago. And he didn't, he's working from a plan that assumes more time, Harry said. He expected this later. Maybe next year. He pushed the portrait open. He was wrong about several things. I'm working on forgiving him for most of them. The corridor outside was empty and lit by torches burning low, the castle doing what it did at night, not asleep, but settled, its magic running at a different frequency, quieter. Harry moved fast and quiet, Ron and Hermione matching his pace, the three of them cutting through the castle's middle levels with the easy navigation of people who had spent 2 months learning its geography. "There are protections on the 3rd floor," Hermione said, keeping her voice low. "I worked out what they are." "Fluffy first, Fluffy," Ron said. "Hagrid's 3-headed dog. He mentioned it." She looked at Harry. "Then a series of enchantments. Devil's Snare, flying keys, a chess set. How do you know all this?" Ron said. "I asked the right questions to the right people and read between the lines of what they said," she told him. "It wasn't difficult if you were paying attention." "I was paying attention," Ron said. "I didn't get any of that." "You were paying attention to Quidditch," she said. "Quidditch is, later," Harry said. They reached the 3rd-floor corridor and the door was already open, not broken, not forced, opened by someone who had known how, which meant Quirrell had done his research thoroughly. Harry passed through it without breaking stride, the other two with him, and they descended through the protections in sequence. The Devil's Snare tried to grab Hermione, which was its last independent action. She identified it in 3 seconds and produced light that made it recoil with the specific baffled retreat of a plant that has grabbed something it didn't account for. The flying keys were a puzzle Ron solved with a startling and instinctive spatial intelligence, directing them through the key chamber with a kind of effortless strategic reading that made Harry file away the information that Ron's apparent casualness concealed something fast and precise inside it. The chess set was Ron's entirely, and he moved through it with the cold clarity of someone in their element, calling pieces and sequences with the quick authority of someone who had spent years thinking several moves ahead, and he did it with no hesitation and no loss despite what the chess pieces were throwing at them. "He's good," Hermione said quietly to Harry as they watched Ron work. "I know," Harry said. "He doesn't." "No," she agreed. "We should fix that. One thing at a time." They went through. The next room was already open, Quirrell ahead of them, moving through the protections with the knowledge of someone who had mapped this path. Harry felt the wrongness on him intensifying with proximity, not just the passenger on the back of his head, but the man himself, wound tight with desperation, the particular frequency of someone who believes they are running out of time. The last chamber opened onto the mirror of Erist. Quirrell stood before it. Harry walked in. Quirrell turned. His face, under the turban, was taut with something that had gone beyond nervousness into a kind of febrile certainty, the look of a man who had been afraid for so long that the fear had become structural, part of his architecture, and what was left was the thing the fear had built around. He had his wand out. The room's candles lit his face from below and made him look like something from a morality tale. "Potter," he said. His voice had changed from the classroom stammer, steady now, controlled, the stammer a thing he deployed rather than suffered. "I expected to be done before you arrived." "You moved faster than I thought," Harry said. He stopped about 10 feet from the man and stood easily, his weight balanced, his hands visible, his wand not drawn. He was reading the room the way Bastet had taught him, the mirror behind Quirrell, Quirrell's wand pointing generally toward him, Ron and Hermione in the doorway behind him. "You can't get the stone out of the mirror," he said. "Not the way you're trying." Quirrell's eyes went sharp. "You know about the stone." "I know about most things in this building." Harry looked at the mirror, the ornate frame, the words across the top, the surface that showed you what you wanted most. He felt it reach toward him the way these things reached, its particular magic brushing against his, and he did something instinctive with the part of him that was Anubis's student, the part that had learned to move through death's domain without getting pulled off course. He simply didn't desire it. He looked at the mirror without wanting anything from it. The stone appeared in his jacket pocket with a small, distinct weight. He felt it arrive. He didn't look down. He kept his eyes on Quirrell. Quirrell had not seen this happen. He was still watching Harry's face. "Step aside," Quirrell said. His wand raised, leveled. "This does not need to involve students." "You involved students when you let the troll in," Harry said. "You've been involving people all year without their consent." He looked at Quirrell steadily. "I'm not stepping aside." "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Quirrell said. "I really do," Harry said. "What's on the back of your head is a soul that's been cut into pieces. A man who was so afraid of dying that he destroyed himself trying to avoid it. What's left is not much. And it is not something I'm afraid of." The stillness in the room changed quality. Quirrell's mouth did something complicated. Then his hands went to the turban. Hermione made a sharp sound. Ron said something under his breath. Harry kept his eyes steady and his breath even and let the thing unwrap, because there was something deeply important about not looking away from things. Anubis had taught him that, the god who looked at every soul without flinching had given him this, the ability to see clearly without the flinching. Voldemort's face on the back of Quirrell's head was not what the stories made it. The stories had made it massive, legendary, a darkness shaped like a person. What it actually was small. A fragment of a human being that had been afraid for so long the fear had become its whole face, red-eyed, pale, structured around the logic of something running and never reaching safety, a face that had not rested since it was young because it had never once stopped believing the world would take everything from it if it stopped. Harry looked at it and felt something that surprised him. Not fear. He'd been clear on that already. Pity. Just a thread of it. The thin, honest pity of someone who has been raised by the god of death and understands what it costs to run from the inevitable. "Harry Potter," said Voldemort's fragment, and his voice was two voices at once, layered and wrong, the voice of the man Quirrell had been and the thing Quirrell now hosted. "You are not what they said you were." "No," Harry agreed. "I'm not. Give me the stone." The red eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that had nothing in it Harry recognized as human threat, only something compressed and hot and ancient. "You cannot conceive of what I could restore with it. What I was. What I will be again." "What you were," Harry said, "is a man who was brilliant and terrified and made the worst possible use of both." He reached into his jacket pocket. He closed his hand around the stone, smooth, warm, dense with the particular magic of something that had answered a very old question about alchemy. "I know what you are now. I've spent time with death, and you are not it. You're something death is waiting on." He looked at the red eyes. "You've been running a long time, haven't you?" Something moved in those eyes. Not humanity, not exactly. Something more primitive than humanity, the animal layer under it. Recognition of a kind. "You will not use it," Voldemort said. "No," Harry agreed. "And neither will you." He closed his fist around the stone. The thing happened quickly. Voldemort moved Quirrell's wand with the speed of a cornered thing, a curse thrown that was nothing verbal, just intention made physical, green light that was not quite a killing curse, not enough of Voldemort remained for a full one, but something in the family, something meant to end. Harry sidestepped it with the unhurried precision of someone who has been sparring with a goddess since he was 12, the spell passing close enough to stir the air beside his cheek. He stepped forward. Quirrell tried to seize him, both hands reaching, the reflex of someone who has run out of other options. Harry's hand closed on Quirrell's wrist, the stone still in his other fist, and, the thing Bastet had told him about himself when he was 9, the thing that had stopped her mid-sentence and made her choose different words. The love that had saved him at 1 year old, that had settled into his skin and his cells and his fundamental structure, the love that Voldemort had never catalogued because it operated outside his experience. It didn't have a color or a temperature. It didn't announce itself. It simply was. Quirrell screamed. Not pain exactly, something more fundamental than pain, the scream of something that cannot tolerate what it has touched. Where Harry's hand gripped his wrist, the flesh went white and then dark in a branching pattern, and Quirrell was pulling away, pulling hard, but Harry held on because holding on was the right thing, because this was almost finished and finished was better than left incomplete. Voldemort's fragment began to separate from Quirrell. Harry could feel it, the passenger detaching, the unwilling severance of a thing that had nowhere else to go. It was like watching someone climb out of a burning building, except the building was a person and the fire was being proximity to something that love had made into something like a natural weapon. The fragment rose. It was visible, barely, a smear of wrongness in the air, a shape that was almost a face and almost not, that was the residue of a human being who had worked very hard to become something else and had mostly succeeded. It looked at Harry with its red smear eyes. Harry looked back. "Go," he said. Not cruelly. Not triumphantly. The way you say it to something that is finished and needs to be told. The fragment dispersed. Not destroyed, that was not his call to make, that was Anubis's domain, the judgment of souls, and Harry had been raised with enough respect for process to know the difference between what he could do and what he should. The fragment dispersed and was gone from the room, and the rest of that was another's work. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him because Quirrell was a person and his choices weren't all his own, and the floor was stone. He lowered the man carefully and checked him with the quick, practiced competence of someone trained in the understanding of living bodies and what they needed to keep going. Quirrell was breathing, poorly, shallowly, but breathing. His wrist where Harry had gripped it was burned in the branching pattern that would scar but not kill. "Go get McGonagall," Harry said, without turning around. Hermione was already moving. Ron stayed, because Ron had already learned the thing about Harry, that when he said one person should go, he meant he wanted one person to stay, and staying was Ron's instinct anyway. Ron came and crouched beside Quirrell. He looked at the man, at the burns, at the room. He looked at Harry. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," Harry said. "The green light, missed," Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment. "You caught him," he said. "After. You caught Quirrell." "He was falling," Harry said. Ron processed this. "Most people," he said carefully, "wouldn't have, he just tried to, I know what he tried," Harry said. "He's still a person." He looked at Quirrell's drawn face. "He made bad choices. Voldemort made worse ones. Those aren't the same thing." Ron was quiet for another moment. Then he sat down on the floor next to Harry and Quirrell and said nothing, which was exactly right, and the two of them waited in the candlelit chamber for McGonagall to come. Outside, above the castle, the owls came from a different direction. They had not been there when Harry went into the third-floor corridor. They had not been there when Quirrell unwrapped his turban. They were there now, not 7 this time, and not silent. These were birds of another order entirely, moving in a formation that had nothing to do with birds and everything to do with the men who'd sent them, dark-robed figures that arrived at the castle's outer wards on broomsticks with the careful, coordinated approach of people who had done this before. Cutting wards, checking entries, moving toward the castle with a patient efficiency that was almost professional. 8 Death Eaters. Summoned, Harry would learn later, by the fragment of Voldemort they'd been in contact with, a contingency, a plan within a plan, because Voldemort had always run contingencies, had always had a secondary move, had always assumed that the primary would fail and prepared accordingly. If Quirrell succeeded, he would need an exit. If Quirrell failed, they would retrieve the stone themselves, or burn the building, or both. They breached the outer wall at the North Tower. They got 20 feet past it. The thing that stopped them did not come from inside the castle. It came from the grounds, from the part of the grounds where the ancient magic of the wards thinned, where the stone was oldest, where something had settled into the geography of the place over the past 2 months with the unhurried permanence of something that had nowhere else to be and no particular intention of leaving. Anubis did not appear dramatically. He was simply there, which was always how he arrived, present where he had not been, with no transition, no announcement. He stood between the Death Eaters and the castle in the dark of the Scottish grounds with his hands at his sides and his jackal head still against the night sky. There was no golden light, no theatrical display. There was only him, which was sufficient. The Death Eaters stopped. They were not the kind of men who stopped easily. They had spent years conditioning themselves against fear, had been trained and tested and shaped into something that was meant to be past ordinary human hesitation. They stopped anyway, because the thing in front of them was not something ordinary human hesitation was designed for. It was not a wizard. It was not a dark creature. It was not anything in their training. It was older than their training. Older than everything their training was built on. One of them, bolder than the rest, or more desperate, or simply the kind of person who did not learn from the responses of his own nervous system, raised his wand. "Stand aside," he said, and he said it with the voice of a man who expected to be obeyed. Anubis looked at him. The man's wand arm dropped. Not because of a spell, because the look was a thing with weight to it, a thing that moved through a person and left their body's decisions behind, and what it communicated was something below language. "I know exactly what you are. I have catalogued every version of you. I know the specific quality of your soul and I know what it will weigh and I have all the time there is, which means you have none." The man sat down on the grass. This was not theatrical. His legs simply stopped holding him. The Death Eaters had good communication with each other, the wordless kind that comes from years of shared action. They looked at each other in the dark. They looked at the thing blocking their path. They looked at the castle, the lit windows, the warmth of it. One of them turned and ran. This is not, generally, what Death Eaters did. It is what these ones did, in sequence, within the span of about 4 seconds, and it would have been undignified except that the man sitting on the grass was watching them go with the patient, total absence of judgment that was in some ways worse than any judgment at all. 3 of them, the ones who had not moved fast enough or in the right direction, found that the running had not been as useful as they'd hoped. This was because of Bastet. She had come from the west, because Anubis had come from the north and they communicated the way very old allies communicate, through understanding of each other's instincts rather than plan. She was in her full aspect, not the golden woman with cat ears, not the domestic warmth, but the aspect that predated that, the one that was older and larger and fiercer, the Sekhmet-adjacent face of the war goddess, the one that had been called on in Egypt when armies needed more than strategy. She was the size of a very large lioness and her eyes were the color of fire and she moved the way she'd always moved, perfectly, without waste, in absolute command of the geometry of her own body in space. She put 3 Death Eaters on the ground in the time it took Harry, inside the castle, to lower Quirrell carefully onto the stone floor. She did not kill them. This was a choice, and it required more discipline than the alternative. She could feel the Ma'at principle at work, the ancient algorithm for correct action, what was proportionate, what was sufficient, what served justice without becoming cruelty. 3 men on the ground, disarmed, physically unable to continue, alive to face the consequences of what they were part of. That was sufficient. She held them there, one enormous paw on the back of the one who had spoken to Anubis, who seemed to have made his peace with the grass and was not moving, and looked up at the castle. The lights in the windows. Her son in there, her boy, who had gone in and done what needed doing and was coming out whole. She exhaled. The sound of it was the sound the field of reeds made sometimes, long and searching. Around her, 3 Death Eaters did not move. The 5 who'd run were found in various states over the next 6 hours by Aurors who arrived in force just before dawn, summoned by Dumbledore's Patronus, which, Harry reflected, the headmaster sent quickly once he arrived at the mirror chamber and found what was there. They were found in woods, in fields, in one case in a small Scottish village where the man had apparently knocked on a door at 3 in the morning and asked for tea and been let in by an elderly woman who said later that he'd looked like he'd had a very bad night and she'd felt sorry for him. Harry found out about most of this later. In the immediate, there was McGonagall arriving in the mirror chamber with her wand out and her dressing gown on and an expression that suggested she had fully intended to handle whatever was there and was recalibrating with remarkable speed. There was the Metawizard who came for Quirrell. There was Dumbledore, who arrived separately and stood in the doorway of the mirror chamber and looked at Harry for a long moment before he looked at anything else. "You're unhurt," Dumbledore said. "Yes," Harry said. He handed over the stone. He placed it in the old man's hand without ceremony, because the thing in his pocket was not his to keep and he'd never intended to keep it. "Quirrell needs medical attention. Voldemort's fragment is gone, dispersed, not destroyed, so it'll reconstitute somewhere eventually, but not here and not now. Dumbledore looked at the stone in his palm. He looked at Harry. How did you? The stone was protected by a mirror that would give it only to someone who wanted it but wouldn't use it. I don't want things that aren't mine, Harry said simply. The mirror and I agreed on that. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment that contained a great deal. And the fragment, he said carefully. It tried, a curse. Not a full killing curse. He doesn't have enough of himself left for that. Harry paused. He'll be back, eventually. In some form. You know that. I know, Dumbledore said. And there was something in his voice that was neither the grandfatherly warmth he performed for the school nor the deliberate mysticism he performed for everyone else. It was simply the voice of a tired old man who knew something hard and had known it for a long time. I had hoped for more time. You had hoped for a different kind of solution, Harry said, not unkindly. One that involved someone more like what you expected me to be. Dumbledore met his eyes. The blue of them was very clear and very old and, in this moment, stripped of performance. Yes, he said. That is true. I am reconsidering a great many things. Good, Harry said. I'll help, if you want. That's a genuine offer. A pause. I believe it is, Dumbledore said. Something moved in his face, not relief exactly, more like the specific feeling of a man who has been walking a very difficult road and has unexpectedly been handed better provisions. Thank you, Harry. Don't thank me yet, Harry said. We still have a conversation ahead of us about how I ended up on a doorstep. Dumbledore absorbed this with the dignity of someone accepting a consequence they know they've earned. We do, he said. And I will not avoid it. Ron and Hermione found him outside afterward, in the cold Scottish pre-dawn, sitting on the steps of the main entrance with his jacket unzipped and his eyes on the grounds. In the grounds, closer to the castle now, her enormous shape resolving itself back into the woman with the amber eyes and the cat ears, Bastet moved between the three downed Death Eaters with precise efficiency, doing something that was not quite guard duty and not quite medical attention but was something in between. Some ancient practice of dealing with the aftermath of force that had its own grammar. Anubis stood at the edge of the tree-line, still and enormous and patient, watching. Hermione sat on the step beside Harry. She looked at Bastet in the grounds. She looked at Anubis at the tree-line. She looked at Harry. Those are your guardians, she said. Yes, Harry said. Bastet, she said. And, Anubis, Harry said. A very long silence. The Egyptian gods, Hermione said. Yes. The actual Egyptian, yes. She was quiet for a moment. Harry could feel her processing this, running it through the entire architecture of everything she knew and finding, to her credit, that she arrived at acceptance faster than most people would have because she was fundamentally a person who trusted evidence over expectation. She'd just seen Bastet put 3 Death Eaters on the ground without breaking a sweat. The evidence was compelling. Okay, she said. Ron, on Harry's other side, had been quiet since the grounds, which for Ron meant something was happening internally that needed room. Now he said, in a voice that was careful and specific, that big one at the tree-line. Is he actually, the god of death, Harry said. Yes. Ron breathed in through his nose. Right, he said. He nodded twice, slowly, the nod of a person integrating a significant piece of information. And he raised you. Since I was 6, Harry said. Since you were, right. Another nod. And that's why you're not afraid of anything. Basically. It helps, Harry said. Ron turned and looked at him directly. Harry. When we first met and I thought you were mental for looking at Quirrell like that at dinner. He paused. I want to formally take that back. You didn't say it out loud, Harry said. I thought it very loudly, Ron said. It counts. Harry looked at him. He looked at Hermione. He looked at his friends, these two specific people who had followed him into a corridor at midnight without asking for a full explanation first, who had contributed specific and irreplaceable things at each step, who were now sitting on stone steps at 4 in the morning processing the existence of Egyptian gods with the kind of functional resilience that was either extraordinary or simply what happened when you were the right kind of person. He felt something that Bastet had named for him once, when he was about 10 and struggling to describe what he felt when all three of them sat at the courtyard table in the evenings and the day had been good. Contentment, she'd said. The feeling when things are as they should be. Thank you, he said to both of them. For coming. Obviously, Hermione said. Wasn't a question, Ron said. In the grounds, Bastet straightened up from the last Death Eater and looked toward the castle steps with unerring accuracy, directly at Harry, across all that dark and distance. Even from here the amber eyes were vivid. She looked at him for a moment, that complete, particular attention, and then she looked at the two people sitting on either side of him, and her expression did something that Harry couldn't fully read at this distance but that felt, in his chest, like the warm specific sensation of someone important to you giving their approval. Then she looked at the tree-line and something passed between her and Anubis, one of their wordless exchanges, and Anubis moved from the tree-line toward the steps, his stride unhurried and his presence something that preceded him, so that by the time he arrived at the bottom of the steps both Ron and Hermione were very still in the particular way of people who have understood, physically, that what is approaching is not something their nervous systems have a precedent for. He stopped at the foot of the steps and looked up. Harry looked down at him. You're unhurt, Anubis said. He said it the way he'd said it once to Harry at age 13 after a training accident that had been Bastet's error in judgment and about which there had been a significant discussion, not with relief, because gods didn't perform relief, but with the quality of something that had been attentive and was now able to stop being attentive for a moment. I'm fine, Harry said. And this time it was not the automatic, worn smooth lie he'd learned on Privet Drive. It was the truth, said plainly, by someone who knew the difference. The fragment? Anubis said. Dispersed, Harry said. Not destroyed. It's yours to deal with when it reconstitutes, if you want it. Anubis looked at him for a moment. I will be watching for it, he said. I know. A pause. The Death Eaters, alive, Anubis said. 3 here. 5 elsewhere, found or being found. He was quiet for a moment. Bastet was, measured. That surprises you? Harry said. When it concerns you, she is not always measured, Anubis said, with the complete neutrality of someone being accurate. From across the grounds, I can hear you, Bastet said. Neither of them responded to this. Ron had stopped being very still and graduated to carefully trying to seem like he was not staring at the god of death, which was not working. Hermione had given up pretending and was looking at Anubis with the open, intent curiosity of someone who has encountered something genuinely extraordinary and is choosing to simply engage with that fact rather than perform a reaction. Sir, Hermione said. Anubis looked at her. You're the god of death, she said. Yes, he said. And you raised Harry, she said. Yes, he said. Then, she hesitated, which was rare for her, and what Harry read in the hesitation was not uncertainty about her question but care for its impact, a calculation about whether it was appropriate to ask. She asked anyway, because that was also Hermione. Are his parents, are they, at peace, Anubis said. The same answer Harry had given Hagrid, from the same certainty, from the same direct knowledge. Yes. Hermione pressed her lips together briefly. Thank you, she said. For telling me. Anubis looked at her for a moment with his gold eyes. Then he looked at Ron, who had gone slightly red but was holding the eye contact with the stubborn determination of someone who decided he was not going to be the person who looked away from the god of death. He held it for almost 5 seconds. Then, good, Anubis said simply. Good. Ron said, in a slightly strangled voice. Loyalty, Anubis said. He said it like a word with weight. He looked back at Harry. You chose well. I didn't choose them, Harry said. They chose me. Both of them, in the antechamber before the sorting. I just noticed it was happening. Anubis was quiet for a moment. Something moved in his expression that Harry knew better than almost anyone alive, and that meant, as closely as he could translate, yes, that is also how it happened with us. Behind them the castle was waking up, lights finding windows, the sounds of movement and voice starting to build. Somewhere inside, Dumbledore was speaking to Aurors. Somewhere, McGonagall was writing reports. The night was ending and the day was deciding what kind of day to be. Bastet arrived at the steps and sat on the bottom one, which she did with characteristic complete comfort, folding herself into stillness with her elbows on her knees, and looked out at the grounds. The 3 downed Death Eaters were still there, very still, being watched by a Patronus McGonagall had left on guard detail. They'll send more, Bastet said. Not today. But eventually. I know, Harry said. He'll reconstitute within a year, probably, she said. Maybe less. I know, Harry said again. She turned and looked at him. The amber eyes were warm and direct, and underneath the warmth was the enormous complicated thing she always contained when she looked at him, which was protective and proud and fiercely certain, and also something that she had once, late in an evening when Harry was 13 and they'd been talking about hard things, named honestly, terrified, sometimes. Of losing you. Even knowing I can't. Of losing the specific person you are, to what the world wants to make you into. He'd told her then what he told her now, without words, just with the look he gave her back, the one that said, I am still here. I am still me. Nothing made me into something I didn't choose. She nodded once. Right, she said, and stood. Breakfast, then. It's 4 in the morning, Ron said. I know how to make bread, she said. I've been practicing. Ron looked at Harry. Your guardian, he said slowly, the cat goddess, is going to make us breakfast. If you'd like, Harry said. Ron's face moved through several expressions and landed on one that was simply, yeah. All right. Yeah. Hermione gathered herself, straightened her robes, and walked up the steps into the castle with the composed efficiency of someone who had processed the last 3 hours and was ready for the next thing. She paused at the top and looked back, at the dark grounds, at the sky beginning its first pale shift at the edges. Harry, she said. You were brilliant tonight. You worked out the protections, he said. Ron played the chess set. You knew what you were doing, she said, specifically. Not just the magic. She gestured, slightly, at the general concept of him. The other part. He thought about what she meant. About catching Quirrell. About looking at the fragment and feeling pity rather than triumph. About knowing the difference between a person and the thing that had used them. Someone taught me well, he said. He looked at Anubis, who was standing at the base of the steps and who had, at some point, become something that the castle appeared to have accepted. Its magic was running quietly around him, not resisting, not highlighting, just present alongside him the way it was present alongside all things that belonged. Anubis looked back. The morning came in. Chapter 5, What the Ministry Made of It. The owls arrived at the Ministry of Magic at 7:43 in the morning, which was early enough that the night shift was still logging out and the day shift hadn't yet settled into their routines, and the resulting chaos had a specific quality, not the chaos of crisis but the chaos of bureaucracy interrupted, which is in some ways worse because it involves a great deal of memo writing. Cornelius Fudge arrived at Hogwarts by mid-morning. Harry knew he was coming before he arrived because Dumbledore sent a note to Gryffindor Tower with the tone of a man who was preparing the ground before something walked on it. The note said, "The Minister for Magic will be visiting today regarding last night's events. Your presence will be requested. I would appreciate, though not require, some degree of diplomatic restraint." Harry read the note. He read the word restraint. He looked at Ron, who was eating toast, and Hermione, who had already read the note over his shoulder and was making a face that suggested she felt restraint was a reasonable request and was preparing to enforce it on everyone including herself. He means don't terrify the minister, Ron said. I know what he means, Harry said. Are you going to? Ron said. Harry folded the note. That depends entirely on the minister. They found out about the minister at 10:30, in Dumbledore's office, which was more crowded than usual, 3 Aurors in the corner doing their best impression of furniture, McGonagall by the window with the expression of someone who has had 4 hours of sleep and is operating on professionalism and principle alone, and Cornelius Fudge in the chair across from Dumbledore's desk, in lime green robes that were doing a great deal of work to establish authority in a room that seemed mildly resistant to the project. Fudge was a broad, flustered man who wore importance the way some people wore formal clothes, with slightly too much awareness of it, too many adjustments. He had a bowler hat on his knee that he kept touching. He was doing what politicians do when they are deeply uncertain about a situation and need to look like they aren't, which is to fill the space with words and confidence in inverse proportion to how much they actually have. He stopped talking when Harry walked in. He looked at Harry, at the scar, at the green eyes, at the face that was not the face of an overwhelmed 16-year-old who'd had a difficult night, and touched his bowler hat. Mr. Potter, he said, and the warmth in his voice was the specific warmth of a man calculating the PR value of a handshake. My dear boy, we've been, the whole ministry has been, it is a tremendous relief. He stood and extended his hand with the energy of someone unveiling a piece of architecture. Harry shook it. He was polite. He was, actually, perfectly pleasant, because there was nothing to be gained by being otherwise, and Fudge, who was a political creature reading the room aggressively, immediately took the pleasantness as a sign that he was in control of the conversation. Remarkable business, Fudge said, resettling in his chair with the relieved air of a man who'd expected something more difficult. Remarkable. Death Eaters at Hogwarts, well, we'll be reviewing the security protocols, of course, and this business with Quirrell, very sad, he shook his head. But you're well. You're quite well, by the look of you. I'm fine, Harry said. Good, good. Now. Fudge's eyes flicked to Dumbledore and back to Harry with the triangulating speed of a man checking the exits. There are a few things we'd like to understand, just for the record, the bodies in the grounds, for instance. Nobody died, Harry said. No, quite right, nobody died, but there was significant physical damage to 3 of the individuals in the grounds, and the Aurors are trying to understand what produced it. They were put down by someone protecting the castle, Harry said. They're alive. They're in custody. Yes, but, who, Mr. Potter? Who produced that level of? The Auror team is describing injuries consistent with something well outside standard combat magic, and the witnesses in the grounds are reporting, well, they're reporting something that sounds rather unusual. Harry said. Impossible, frankly, Fudge said. He laughed, the laugh of a man trying to make something into a joke before it could become a problem. Giant cat, they're saying. I told them, stress, long night, you know how it, there was a large cat, Harry said. The laugh stopped. Fudge looked at him. He looked at Dumbledore. He looked at Harry again. A very large cat, Harry said. Yes. She's a guardian. She was protecting the school. Fudge's hand found his bowler hat. He said. She, Harry confirmed. A pause in which Fudge attempted, visibly, to categorize this and failed. He turned to Dumbledore with the expression of a man sending a distress signal. Albus, Harry's guardians are, Dumbledore chose his next word with the careful deliberation of a man choosing footing on uncertain ground. Extraordinary individuals. I am confident in their judgment and their intentions. There are multiple, too, Harry said. My guardian's name is Bastet. The other is Anubis. He said both names clearly, the same way he always said them, without mystification, without ceremony, simply as names of people he knew. They've been raising me since I was 6. They came last night because the situation warranted it. The office went quiet in a particular way. The horrors in the corner had stopped being furniture. McGonagall's expression hadn't changed, but her hands had, very slightly, adjusted their position. Dumbledore watched Fudge with the patient attention of a man watching a weather system develop. Fudge said, very carefully, Bastet and Anubis. Yes, Harry said. You mean, those are, as in, the Egyptian gods, Harry said. Yes. The bowler hat left Fudge's knee and hit the floor. Nobody commented on this. That's, Fudge said. They're who raised me, Harry said. After I was left on the Dursleys' doorstep and things there became untenable. He kept his voice even. He was not, he realized, actually being difficult. He was simply telling the truth without softening it, which in a political context had the same effect as being difficult, which was its own interesting observation. Anubis is the god of death and judgment. Bastet is the goddess of home and protection. Both of them were at Hogwarts last night. 3 Death Eaters were detained and 5 fled. Nobody died. All things considered, I'd call that a good outcome. Fudge stared at him. My dear boy, he said, in a voice that had lost all of its earlier political warmth and become something genuine, something uncertain, something that was trying to find stable ground and kept finding that where it put its foot was not ground. Are you saying that you were, that the gods, that actual, yes, Harry said. A very long silence. Right, Fudge said. He bent and picked up his hat from the floor and held it with both hands. Right. He looked at Dumbledore. There are going to need to be, take your time, Cornelius, Dumbledore said. This is significantly outside of standard ministry. Fudge stopped. He looked at Harry again, and now there was something different in the look, not the political calculation of earlier, not the manufactured warmth, but the rawer look of a person who has encountered something they didn't prepare for and is working out what to feel. Are they here? Now. Not in the building, Harry said. Probably on the grounds. He paused. Anubis doesn't always tell me when he's nearby. He just is, sometimes. Fudge absorbed this with the specific quality of absorption that a man has when he has decided to stop processing the incoming information and simply let it accumulate for later. We'll need a statement, he said. For the record. Formal statement, what happened last night, I'll give you one, Harry said. Truthful and complete. Under 2 conditions. Fudge blinked. Conditions. First, the statement is not edited or suppressed. What happened last night is what happened last night, including the parts that are unusual. He kept his eyes steady. Second, the ministry's record on the Dursley situation is reviewed. I was placed in a home under Dumbledore's authority and the ministry's oversight. I was 6 years old and not well treated. I'd like that acknowledged, not publicly if that's complicated, but officially. The room's quiet had shifted again. McGonagall had gone very still. Dumbledore's expression was the expression he'd worn since the Mirror Chamber, the face of a man in an ongoing reckoning. Fudge looked between them. He was a politician and politicians understand leverage intuitively, understand when they are in a room where they are not the person holding it. He also, Harry noted, was not simply a bad man. He was a limited one, which was different, a man whose primary survival instinct was institutional rather than personal, who would do almost anything to keep the machine running smoothly, but who, when the machine was taken out of the equation, was simply a person trying to make sense of something genuinely senseless. Agreed, Fudge said. On both conditions. He looked at Harry for a moment. The ministry should have, he stopped. He took a breath. I'm sorry, he said, in the voice of someone who doesn't say it often enough to do it elegantly but is saying it genuinely regardless. For what you experienced. In that house. Harry looked at him. He thought about what Anubis had taught him about judgment, about accuracy, about weighing what was present against what was deserved, without adjusting the scale for what was convenient. Thank you, he said. I appreciate it. The statement took 2 hours. Harry gave it precisely, what he'd observed, what he'd done, what had happened in sequence. He said Voldemort's name throughout, which made the Auror taking notes visibly uncomfortable but which Harry declined to stop doing on the grounds that the name was a name and avoiding it served nobody. He described the stone, Quirrell, the fragments' dispersal. He described Bastet and Anubis's intervention in the grounds. The Auror put his quill down at one point and said, "I need to ask, and I want to be clear, I mean no disrespect, are you certain that what you saw was, are you asking if I imagined the goddess and the god who raised me coming to defend the school?" Harry said. A pause. "When you put it that way," the Auror said, and picked his quill back up. The statement was filed. Fudge left with the energy of a man who has had a very large amount of information handed to him and intends to go somewhere quiet and sit with it. He shook Harry's hand at the door, and the handshake this time was different, not the calculated warmth of earlier but something more ordinary, more real. The handshake of a man who has been surprised into sincerity. McGonagall waited until Fudge and the Aurors were gone, and then she sat down in the nearest chair with a movement that suggested her legs had been waiting for permission to do that for several hours. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Professor." "I owe you an apology," she said. She said it quickly, with the efficiency of someone who has made a decision and is executing it before they can change their mind. "I knew what the Dursley household was. Not in detail, but I had concerns. When Dumbledore placed you there I had concerns and I did not press them adequately. I should have." She looked at him directly, McGonagall to Potter, the full force of her. "I am sorry." Harry looked at her. He thought about the McGonagall who had known his mother, who had apparently been there the night he was left on the doorstep. He thought about what it cost a person of her particular pride and discipline to say that. "I know you would have changed it if you could," he said. "That is generous," she said. "It's accurate," he said. "There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your parents would be, they are, I believe they would be very proud." "I know they are," he said. "I've spoken to them." McGonagall looked at him. She nodded once, the nod she gave when she had no words for something and was choosing not to pretend otherwise. "Transfiguration essay," she said. "Due Thursday. Your position on the matter, despite last night, has not changed." "Understood," Harry said, and left. The week that followed was, in its way, stranger than the night had been. Hogwarts processed the events the way schools process everything, through rumor, then partial truth, then the version of the truth that became the commonly accepted story through sheer repetition. The version that circulated in the corridors was approximately 60% accurate and enthusiastically embellished. By Wednesday it had grown a second troll and by Friday there were 4 Death Eaters rather than 8, which was somehow more alarming to everyone, possibly because a smaller number felt more intimate. Harry's name was everywhere, which he navigated with the easy disinterest of someone who had been navigating the gap between what people believed about him and what he actually was since the night he'd walked into the Great Hall. He was pleasant with people who were pleasant. He was honest with people who asked direct questions. He was unmoved by the students who treated him with the new reverence that the story had generated, and equally unmoved by the handful, mostly Slytherin, not entirely, who responded to that reverence with competitive skepticism. Malfoy found him again on Wednesday. This time it wasn't in a corridor. It was in the library, which Harry visited frequently and which Draco apparently used for purposes other than studying, given that he arrived without books and spent 45 seconds pretending to look at the shelf nearest to where Harry was sitting before giving up the pretense. "The story going around," Malfoy said, sitting across the table without asking, which Harry found he didn't actually mind. "About Sunday night. About what was in the grounds." "What about it?" Harry said. He didn't look up from the advanced magical theory book he'd bought in Diagon Alley, which was proving increasingly rewarding the further in he got. "Is it true?" Malfoy said. Harry looked up. Malfoy's face was doing the thing it sometimes did, the performance of casualness over something that wasn't casual at all, the tightly managed expression of a boy who had feelings he'd been taught were inconvenient and was keeping them in a very controlled environment. His eyes had a specific quality that Harry had learned to recognize, the look of someone who knew, from their home and their family and everything they'd been raised in, that the Dark Lord was real and returning and dangerous, and who was trying to work out what it meant that someone had apparently handled it this calmly. "Yes," Harry said. "Mostly. The trolls were one, not two." Malfoy was quiet. The thing in the grounds. Her name is Bastet," Harry said. "She's a guardian. She's been raising me since I was 6. "Bastet," Malfoy said. He said it the way people said words they'd seen in books and never heard spoken, feeling the shape of it. "The cat goddess." "The cat goddess," Harry confirmed. Another silence. Malfoy's fingers were on the table edge, not drumming, stilling, which in Harry's experience was the body doing something more deliberate than drumming. "And the other one," Malfoy said. The one that the Auror said was at the tree lean." "Anubis," Harry said. Malfoy went slightly pale. Not dramatically, a millimeter of color leaving his face. "The god of death," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "He raised me too." A long pause. "They came," Malfoy said slowly, "because the Death Eaters were there." "They came because I was there," Harry said. "And the Death Eaters were a consequence they dealt with." He looked at Malfoy clearly. "Why are you asking, Draco?" The use of his first name shifted something. Malfoy's careful expression flickered. "My father," he said, after a moment. "He wasn't there, Sunday. But he knew about it. He knew it was planned." His voice was even, controlled, the voice of someone reporting information rather than feeling it, which meant he was feeling it considerably. "I don't know where I stand," he said. "In all of it. I thought I knew." He stopped. Harry watched him. He thought about what Anubis had taught him about souls, not their deeds but their potential, the future weight of a thing that hadn't finished developing. He thought about what Bastet had taught him about instinct versus training, about the difference between what you'd been shaped into and what you actually were. "You don't have to decide today," Harry said. Malfoy looked at him. "Where you stand," Harry said. "It doesn't have to be today. You're 16. The situation has time still." He paused. "But when you do decide, decide because it's true. Not because it's easier or expected." Malfoy stared at him. He stared long enough that it moved past the point of comfortable silence. Then he stood, tucking his robe straight with the automatic precision of someone who does that when they need a moment. "You're strange," Malfoy said. "I know," Harry said pleasantly. Malfoy left. Harry watched him go and thought, he'll choose correctly eventually. He'll need time and something specific to happen and the right kind of witness. But he'll choose correctly. He felt the Ma'at compass in his chest, tilted slightly toward that possibility the way it tilted toward truth. He went back to his book. The letter from Bastet arrived on Thursday. It was longer than her usual letters. Bastet wrote the way she did most things, with directness and periodic fire, and her letters were typically dense with opinion and shorter on pleasantry than Anubis's, which were formal and thorough in the way of a being with a great deal to say and the patience to say all of it correctly. This one was different. Longer. More deliberate. She wrote, been corresponding with McGonagall. Harry read this sentence twice. "Your deputy headmistress wrote to me," Bastet wrote, "following a conversation she had with you. She is an interesting woman. She transforms into a cat. We have had several exchanges that were professional, respectful, and contained a great deal of information that each of us was technically communicating between the lines. I like her. This surprised me. She has asked if I would be willing to meet with the staff. To discuss, formally, the situation, what happened Sunday, what the implications are going forward, what our role is in the context of your education and safety. She also mentioned, and I want to be clear, she was very tactful about this, that the student body has been asking questions that the staff feel unequipped to answer without more information. I told her I would consider it. I am considering it. I want to know your thoughts. Harry set the letter down. He looked at the common room fire. He thought about Bastet in a room full of teachers. He thought about it for approximately 30 seconds and then began his reply. You should go. Anubis too, if he'll come. McGonagall is someone you can work with, she's honest in the way that matters. The rest of the staff are arranged, but none of them are stupid, and stupid is the only thing I'd worry about. I'd suggest Thursday next week, if you want a day. Most of the staff are available after 4. Don't lecture anyone. You know the urge. Don't. He paused and added, I say this with complete love. Bastet's reply came the next morning. It said, I do not lecture. I inform with enthusiasm. He showed this to Hermione, who read it and said, I think I understand where you get it from. Get what from? She gestured at him in the same general way she gestured in the mirror chamber. This, she said. I'll take that as a compliment, he said. It was, she said. The staff meeting was the following Thursday at 4:30, in the staff room, and Harry was not present for it because Bastet had been firm that some things should happen without him and he'd agreed, because Bastet was usually right about these things. He sat in the common room with Ron and they played chess. Ron won in 12 minutes, which had become standard, and then Ron spent another 20 minutes teaching Harry to be less terrible, which was patient and genuine and one of the things Harry had come to appreciate most about him, and he tried not to think about what was happening one floor below in the staff room. Ron moved a knight. How bad is it going to be? It's not going to be bad, Harry said. Bastet is, he considered his words. Diplomatic. When she chooses to be. When she chooses to be, Ron repeated, in the tone of someone noting the load-bearing clause. She'll be fine, Harry said. And the other one? Anubis? He doesn't say unnecessary things, Harry said. Ever. So the things he does say tend to land. He said good to me, Ron said. About loyalty. I've been thinking about that. He moved another piece with the absent ease of someone thinking while their hands work. What he meant by it. It felt like it meant something specific. It did, Harry said. He doesn't say words because they fill space. He says them because they're true. Ron was quiet for a moment. Has he always been, is he always like that? With you? Harry thought about Anubis on the courtyard floor, cross-legged, unhurried. Anubis pressing 2 fingers to his forehead in the rain on Privet Drive. Anubis holding out his hand to a 6-year-old who'd been sitting in a storm. Always, Harry said. Ron nodded. Good, he said, with a directness that was his own version of the word, meaning something similar. The chess pieces waited. The fire crackled. Outside the windows the Scottish evening was drawing in, grey and beautiful. Hermione brought them a report afterward, because Hermione had her own method of gathering information that involved knowing which professor was most likely to discuss the meeting in the library within earshot of someone reading in a corner. Sprout cried, she said, sitting down. Professor Flitwick said almost nothing for the entire meeting, but at the end he asked Anubis a question about the history of magic that apparently went on for 40 minutes and Professor Flitwick hasn't stopped talking about it since. What question? Harry said. Whether magic as we practice it is a fragment of something larger that most practitioners no longer have access to. She paused. Apparently the answer was yes. Harry absorbed this. What did McGonagall do? Held the whole thing together, Hermione said, with the specific admiration she reserved for organizational competence. She had an agenda. She made sure it was followed. She also, apparently, had a separate conversation with Bastet after everyone else left, and nobody knows what was said but McGonagall came out of it looking, she searched for the word. Like? Ron prompted. Steadier, Hermione said. Like something had been, like she put something down she'd been carrying. She looked at Harry. I think your guardian said something to her. About your mother, maybe. Harry was quiet for a moment. Maybe, he said. Snape was there, Hermione added, with the particular tone she used for Snape, which was the tone of someone maintaining scientific objectivity toward a subject they found personally exasperating. He asked Bastet one question. What question? Harry said. He asked her what Harry was, exactly. What category of being he fell into. Harry looked at her. What did she say? Hermione looked back at him with the expression she made when she was about to deliver something she'd found worth thinking about. She said, he is himself. That is the only category that applies. The fire crackled. Ron made a small sound that was agreement without being a word. Harry looked at the chessboard. He thought about Bastet saying that in a room full of people who had been trying, in their various ways, to categorize him since September 1st. He thought about how that landed, not as deflection, not as mysticism, but as the most precisely accurate thing that could be said about a person raised by people who had never tried to make him into anything other than what he was. Right, Harry said. My turn. He moved a pawn. Ron looked at it. That's terrible, Ron said. I know, Harry said. Show me why. The Philosopher's Stone was destroyed. Dumbledore told Harry this privately, on a Saturday morning, sitting in the headmaster's office with the Fox the Phoenix on his perch and the winter light falling through the high windows. Nicholas Flamel had been consulted. The decision had been made. There would be no restoration, no second attempt, no object in the world capable of doing what it had nearly done. There will be consequences for Flamel, Harry said. He and his wife are prepared, Dumbledore said. They have had a long life. A good one. He looked at his hands, folded on the desk. They are at peace with what comes. Harry thought about Anubis. About the field of reeds. About what at peace with what comes actually looked like, from close enough to know. Good, he said. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk. It was the fourth private conversation they'd had since the mirror chamber, and each one had been different in texture, the first guarded on both sides, the second more open, the third genuinely something like honest. This one had the quality of something settling, the way a house settles when it's finally been lived in properly. The prophecy, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. I had a plan, Dumbledore said, with the specific care of a man disassembling something he built and acknowledging both what worked and what didn't. For you. It depended on a particular kind of boy. A boy whose suffering had made him, he stopped. Pliable, Harry said. Not harshly. Dumbledore closed his eyes for a moment. I was going to say willing, he said. But pliable is honest. He opened his eyes. You are not that boy. No, Harry said. What you are is considerably more complex and considerably more capable, Dumbledore said. And I think, he stopped again, longer this time, the pause of a man doing genuine work. I think that the prophecy describes what will happen, not how it must be made to happen. I had conflated the two. I had decided that the path to the outcome required a specific shape of person, and I had involved myself in creating that shape. His voice was even, but the things behind it were not. That was wrong of me. Yes, Harry said. It was. Dumbledore absorbed this without deflecting. Can we work together, he said. Not as instrument and architect. As, people with a common interest, Harry said. Yes. That I can do. I would like to earn your trust, Dumbledore said. Over time. Properly. You've made a start, Harry said. The conversation about the Dursleys helped. I imagine it did very little to, it wasn't nothing, Harry said. You acknowledged it. You didn't minimize it. He paused. That matters. More than people think. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, with an expression that contained many things and which Harry read as the face of a man who had lived a very long time and was, in this specific moment, genuinely learning something. Your guardians, Dumbledore said. Bastet and Anubis. He said the names carefully, with the respect of someone who has been given a lot of information in 1 week and has spent it calibrating. They have, in my career I have dealt with many extraordinary things. I have never, he paused. Anubis, particularly. In the grounds, the Auror said, he didn't do anything dramatic, Harry said. He was just there. Yes, Dumbledore said. That was apparently sufficient. He's like that, Harry said. With most things. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You are loved, he said, with the simplicity of a man stating something he has observed as fact. Profoundly and specifically. I recognize it, looking at you, the way you recognize craftsmanship, by what it produces. He looked at Harry directly. I am glad of it. I am glad that, despite the plans I made that should not have been made, something better happened. Harry thought about the storm. About a cat finding him on a step. About the warmth that had moved up through his cold hands. Me too, he said. The letter from Voldemort arrived last. It did not come by owl. It came through the edges of the divine, a small, dark intrusion into the boundary of Anubis's domain, a communication through channels that did not exist in the conventional magical sense, sent by something that had reconstituted enough of itself to compose a message and find a conduit. Harry felt it arrive the way he felt all things that pressed against that boundary, as a specific kind of wrongness, a note played on an instrument that was slightly broken. He read it in the courtyard during the winter break, sitting at the stone table. It was short. I know what you are now. I know who made you. I am not what I was, but I will be again, and when I am, I think you and I will have a great deal to say to each other. I have been told that you are not afraid of me. I believe this. I find it, for the first time in a long time, interesting rather than insulting. We are not finished. Harry set the letter down. He looked at it for a moment. Anubis appeared in the archway. He looked at the letter. He looked at Harry. He reconstituted faster than expected, Harry said. Yes, Anubis said. He found a host. Somewhere cold, Harry said. He'd felt the direction of it, the way you feel wind direction. Eastern Europe, maybe. Albania, Anubis said. A forest. A weak wizard who did not survive the experience. Harry looked at the letter again. He thought about the red eyes in the mirror chamber, the thing made of fear and fury and a brilliant terrible refusal to accept the shape of the world. He thought about what it meant, all of it, the prophecy, the horcruxes that Dumbledore had mentioned carefully in their last conversation, the slow reconstitution of a soul that had been cut into pieces and scattered. He thought, this is going to take time, and it is going to require things of me, and at the end of it something will be different. He thought, I'm ready. He picked up a quill. He wrote back. I'm not finished either. When you're ready, find me. I won't be hiding. He gave it to Anubis, who looked at it, and at Harry, and then folded it and directed it back through the boundary with the quiet efficiency of a being who has sent messages through stranger channels than this. He will come, Anubis said. Eventually. I know, Harry said. You are not concerned. I'm practical, Harry said. Concern doesn't change the timeline. It just makes the waiting worse. He looked at Anubis. You taught me that. I did, Anubis said. It was good teaching, Harry said. A pause. It was, Anubis agreed, with the equanimity of someone who is at peace with being right. Bastet appeared from the house interior with flatbread and 2 cups of something hot, and she set them on the table and sat down without ceremony, the way she did everything, with the complete comfort of someone who belongs where she is and knows it. She looked at the space where the letter had been. She looked at Harry. Albania, she said. Albania, Harry said. She nodded once. She picked up her cup. We have time, she said. We have time, Harry agreed. The courtyard was warm. The field of reeds breathed its long slow breath somewhere beyond the walls. The stars above were the old ones, the Egyptian ones, in their ancient and correct positions. Somewhere in an Albanian forest, a fragment of the most dangerous wizard of the age was gathering itself, slowly, patient with its own reconstruction. Harry ate his flatbread and watched the stars and was not afraid. He thought, not for the first time and not for the last, the world is going to find out what I am. Not because I'm going to tell them. Because I'm going to show them. He thought it without arrogance. He thought it the way you think a fact, cleanly, completely, without the need to perform it. He thought it and finished his flatbread and asked Anubis to show him something new, because there was always something new, and the night was long and they had all the time there was. Chapter 6, The Feather and the Heart. Voldemort came back on a Tuesday in June. Not to Hogwarts. Not to the Ministry. Not to any of the places he'd been expected, the places Dumbledore had quietly reinforced over the months since Albania, the places the Order had been watching with the patient vigilance of people who know they're waiting for something and don't know its exact shape yet. He came to Egypt. Harry knew this because Anubis told him at breakfast, which was a strange way to receive information of that particular magnitude, sitting at the stone courtyard table with tea going cold in his hand, the morning light doing what it always did here, coming from everywhere and nowhere, warm and sourceless. He moved last night, Anubis said. He took a body. Not a willing one. Where is he? Luxor. Near the Valley of the Kings. A pause. He believes the proximity to ancient power will restore something to him. He believes the old sites carry energy he can use. Another pause, drier than the first. He is not entirely wrong. He is, however, significantly wrong about whose energy it is. Harry put his cup down. He came to your ground. He came to my ground, Anubis confirmed, with the specific quality of an extremely old being noting something that will have consequences. Bastet appeared in the kitchen archway. She looked at Anubis. She looked at Harry. He brought people, she said. How many? Harry said. 14 Death Eaters, she said. The inner circle. The ones who waited, who didn't take the dark mark and then pretend otherwise when he fell. The ones who stayed faithful. Harry thought about 14 Death Eaters in the Valley of the Kings with Voldemort at the center of them, pulling at power that predated his entire civilization by several thousand years. He thought about the strategy of it, the intelligence of it, actually, because Voldemort had always been intelligent, had always moved with the instinct of a chess player who thought several boards ahead. He'd picked ground that meant something. Ground where his opponent would have to come to him or cede the territory. He thought about Anubis's expression, not alarmed, not offended, but something more precise than either. He thinks this gives him an advantage, Harry said. He thinks many things, Anubis said. Does he know I'll come? He knows you'll come, Anubis said. That is rather the point. He read your letter. A brief pause. I told you the letter was direct. I did not say it was unwise. It was both. Then he knows the field, Harry said. He said it. He said it on ground he doesn't understand, Bastet said, from the archway, with a quality in her voice that was somewhere between satisfaction and the specific focused calm she had before she did something significant. He knows the old stones are powerful. He doesn't know what they're powerful with. She tilted her head at Anubis. He has no idea. No, Anubis agreed. He has no idea. Harry stood up from the table. He rolled his neck, his shoulders, the habitual sequence of movement that Bastet had given him as a warm-up protocol years ago and that had become as automatic as breathing. He thought about 14 Death Eaters and one fractured, reconstituted, brilliant, terrified man who had spent the better part of the last year pulling himself back together with whatever he could find. He thought about what needed to happen. Not what he wanted to happen, what needed to. There was a difference Anubis had been teaching him since he was 7, between desire and necessity, between the outcome you choose in a perfect situation and the outcome that was correct, measured against the scale of what was true. When, he said. Tonight, Anubis said. He will be ready tonight. He knows the timing, the old nights, when the boundary between the living world and what lies beyond it is thinner. He looked at Harry. He has done his research. He always does, Harry said. It's his most consistent quality. He went inside to write to Ron and Hermione. Hermione's reply came within the hour, which meant she'd had a variant of this letter prepared since approximately October, which was so thoroughly Hermione that Harry felt something warm move through him when he saw the recognizable density of her handwriting on the envelope. We're coming. Don't say we're not coming. We've been preparing for this since the mirror chamber and you know it. Ron has been practicing in the upper field every evening for 3 months and he'll be furious if you try to leave without us. I have 7 books worth of relevant theory in my head and I refuse to let that be academic. We're coming. Where do we meet? Ron's letter was shorter, having apparently been written on the back of Hermione's in the margin because they'd been together when it arrived, in the cramped left-hand scrawl he used when he was writing fast, what she said. Also I'm not afraid. Also I'm a bit afraid. Don't tell her. Harry wrote back. Egypt. Tonight. Anubis will bring you through. Don't be alarmed by how that feels. It feels strange but it won't hurt you. Then he went to find Bastet, who was in the east wing doing what she did when she was preparing for something, moving through the rooms with a quiet, measuring energy, checking things, adjusting, making the physical space of the house as ordered as possible before directing her attention outward. She had a blade in her hand, the long curved one with the handle worn smooth from centuries of use, and she was examining the edge of it with the focused attention she brought to all objects she cared for. I want to talk about tonight, Harry said. Then talk, she said, not looking up. Voldemort is mine to deal with, he said. The Death Eaters, ours, she said, and the possessive was absolute. Without discussion. I wasn't going to argue that, he said. She looked up. Her amber eyes were warm and level and underneath the warmth was the thing that always lived there when they were about to do something significant, not fear, but the enormous, concentrated protectiveness of a being who has chosen someone as her own and would dismantle the architecture of the world before she let that choice be undone. Then what did you want to talk about, she said. What happens after, he said. When it's done. I want you to know what I'm planning. She set the blade down. She gave him her full attention, which was the complete, particular thing that only she and Anubis gave him, the attention that said everything you say matters, I am receiving all of it. He told her. Her expression moved through several things. Settled. That's not what I expected, she said. I know. It's right, she said. It's very right. She picked the blade up again, ran her thumb along the flat of it. He's not going to like it. He's not going to have a choice, Harry said. That's the point. She looked at him with the look she'd given him since he was 6 years old, since a storm and a cold step and a cat finding a child and deciding, with the absolute authority of a goddess who trusts her own instincts completely, that this one was hers. Magnificent, she said, simply. You always say that, he said. I always mean it, she said. They arrived in Egypt at sunset. Not at Luxor directly, Anubis brought them through to the western desert first, to the edge of the dry plateau above the Valley of the Kings where the light was going red and gold and the shadows of the ancient carved hillside stretched long across pale stone. The valley below was still, the tourist paths empty at this hour, the car park at the entrance deserted, and in the particular quality of the silence Harry could feel the age of the place pressing up through the soles of his feet, thousands of years of accumulated intention, the most deliberate concentration of funerary architecture on earth, built by people who took seriously the idea that death was a passage and who had therefore spent generations engineering the passage. Ron and Hermione stood beside him, having been brought through by Anubis with the controlled smoothness of a god who did not make transitions difficult for people he'd decided to protect. Ron was breathing carefully, the careful breathing of someone who has experienced something unusual and is managing it with discipline. Hermione was already looking at the hillside, at the carvings barely visible in the fading light. "This is Anubis's territory," Hermione said quietly. "We're standing on his ground." "We're standing on the ground of every king buried in that valley," Harry said. "All the souls that passed through here. All the weight of it." He felt it very clearly. The boundary here was thin in the way that Anubis had described, old and much used, a threshold worn smooth by millennia of passage. Voldemort chose this because he thought the power here was neutral. Something he could use. "It's not neutral," Hermione said. "No," Harry agreed. "It's not." Bastet appeared beside them. She had arrived separately, from a direction that wasn't quite a physical direction, the way she sometimes arrived when she was in her full aspect. She was in human form, the Golden Woman, but the air around her had the particular charge that Harry had learned to read as her aspect at full extension, the thing under the surface that was larger than the surface. She looked down at the valley with her ears slightly forward and her expression set. 14, she said. "Arranged in a perimeter. He's at the center, near the entrance to Tutankhamun's tomb. He wants the symbolic weight of it." A slight pause. "He understands symbolism. I'll give him that." "He understands a great deal," Harry said. "That's never been his problem." "What is his problem?" Ron said. "He doesn't understand other people," Harry said. "He never has. He's brilliant and he grew up knowing that being brilliant was a defense against everything, and the one thing brilliance can't tell you is what you can't see from inside it." He looked at the valley. "He doesn't understand love as a force. He's encountered it twice as something that burned him and categorized it as a vulnerability he doesn't have rather than a power he can't access." 3 times, now, Hermione said. "The mirror chamber." 3 times, Harry agreed. He should have learned more from each of them. He didn't, because to learn from them he'd have to reclassify his assumptions about what he is, and that's the one thing he won't do. Anubis was the last to appear, from the direction of the valley itself, rising through the last light with his jackal head dark against the red sky, his robes moving without wind. He stopped beside Harry and looked down. "He knows we're here," Anubis said. "Good," Harry said. "He has prepared a curse structure around the perimeter. Complex. Many-layered." Anubis examined it with the calm of a being who has seen everything that human beings have ever devised to avoid his domain and finds it individually interesting and collectively limited. "Effective against conventional magic." "We're not using conventional magic," Harry said. "No," Anubis said. Harry looked at Ron and Hermione. They looked back at him. Ron had his wand out, the comfortable, practiced grip of someone who'd spent 3 months in a field every evening, and it showed in the steadiness of his hand. Hermione had her wand and her beaded bag and the expression she wore when she had prepared thoroughly and trusted her preparation, which was the expression of absolute, grounded readiness. "You don't have to," Harry started. "If you say you don't have to be here," Hermione said, "I'm going to be very annoyed." "We've had this year," Ron said. "We've had the mirror chamber and the chess set and, we've been building to this since September. We know that. You know that." Harry looked at them. He thought about the antechamber before the sorting, the 2 people who had introduced themselves to the new and unknown quantity in the room without being asked, who had made space for him at a table and defended him in conversations and called him out when they thought he was wrong about something, which Hermione did regularly and Ron did in the direct, uncomplicated way that was more effective for being unpolished. "All right," he said. "Stay close. Follow my lead on timing. Don't engage the Death Eaters, Bastet handles them." He looked at Bastet. "Obviously," she said. "When I move toward Voldemort, hold the perimeter. Whatever he does, don't let it pull you off your position." He looked at all of them. "This ends tonight." He started down into the valley. They felt the Death Eaters before they saw them. The cursed structure Anubis had described was visible to Harry as a specific quality of wrongness in the air, a deliberate architecture of harm assembled with impressive technical skill. He walked through it without stopping because the Ma'at sense in his chest recognized it for what it was, and the rest of him knew the difference between a wall built to stop the unprepared and a wall built to stop him, and this was the former. Behind him he heard the Death Eaters notice. The valley lit up. 14 wands, the cold blue-white of combat spells, curses called in voices that were controlled and professional. These were not foot soldiers, these were the inner circle, people who had been practicing their craft for decades with serious intent. The air became a thing with edges. Bastet moved. There was no adequate description for how she moved in her full aspect. Harry had seen it twice before, Sunday night in the Hogwarts grounds and once in training, years ago, when she'd been demonstrating something and had let herself go fully into it for 30 seconds before pulling back. It was not violence in the human sense. It had no waste to it, no rage, no personal feeling, it was pure function, the efficient application of force by something that understood force the way a river understands water, completely and without effort. 7 Death Eaters found themselves dealt with in approximately 25 seconds. Not killed, Bastet had given him her word on that, and her words were things she stood in, but thoroughly removed from the engagement, disarmed, grounded, unable to contribute further in any meaningful way. Ron and Hermione handled their side. Ron's chess mind in a combat situation was extraordinary. Harry had suspected it and now watched it confirmed, Ron moving through the space with the instinctive spatial reading of a player who sees the whole board at all times, covering Hermione, cutting off retreat routes, making himself into exactly the obstacle that needed to be exactly where he was at each moment. He took a stunning spell on the arm that would bruise spectacularly and didn't lose his position. Hermione was devastating in the specific way that someone with complete theoretical mastery and sufficient preparation is devastating. She had a counter-curse for everything that came at them before it arrived, and 2 Death Eaters found that the curses they threw had been predicted and redirected before they fully materialized. Anubis stood in the center of the valley and did nothing. He didn't need to do anything. His presence was its own action. The remaining Death Eaters who found themselves near him discovered what the ones at Hogwarts had discovered, that the god of death's proximity had a specific and unavoidable quality, and 2 of them stopped moving of their own accord and sat down with the expressions of people who have just had a very clarifying encounter with their own mortality. Harry walked through all of it. He walked through the Death Eater's fire and it parted, not because he deflected it all, he deflected some, absorbed others with protections that predated wand magic, let some glance off entirely because the intent behind them was not sufficient to penetrate what he was wearing in a metaphysical sense. He walked with the unhurried directness of someone who has somewhere specific to be and isn't going to be stopped from getting there. He walked toward the center. Toward the figure standing at the entrance of Tutankhamun's tomb, in the flickering light of the spells going off around him, in borrowed flesh that he was wearing with the controlled precision of a man who has inhabited unwilling hosts long enough to be competent at it. Voldemort. The body was a middle-aged man's, dark-haired, unremarkable in every external feature except the eyes, which were his, the red-tinged, lamp-bright eyes that were the consistent signature of whatever soul architecture he'd built for himself over a lifetime of deliberate damage. He stood still and watched Harry come, and his expression was not what Harry expected. He expected rage. He expected the cold fury of the mirror chamber fragment. He expected the performance of menace that was the Dark Lord's primary idiom. He found something more interesting. Voldemort was watching him approach with the expression of a man who is genuinely, deeply curious. The expression of a person encountering the one thing they haven't been able to categorize. His wand was in his hand but he hadn't raised it. He was watching Harry walk through his Death Eater's fire and his perimeter and his cursed structure without being stopped, and he was thinking, visibly and rapidly, and the thinking had the quality of someone who is intelligent enough to revise their model in real time. "You came," Voldemort said. "I said I would," Harry said. He stopped about 15 feet away. He looked at the man, the borrowed face, the careful precise posture, the absolute stillness that Voldemort used as armor the way most people used movement. How many hosts before this one? A pause. Several, Voldemort said. Do you think about them? Harry said. The people you used. I think about what was necessary, Voldemort said. And what was not yet necessary. I prefer the latter, when possible. That's not the same as caring about them, Harry said. No, Voldemort agreed. It is not. He tilted his head, a precise bird-like movement. You are considerably more interesting in person than the stories suggest. The stories suggest I'm a 1-year-old who defeated you by existing, Harry said. That's a low bar. It was not, Voldemort said, and there was something in his voice that was closest to respect, that's simple. I have thought about that night for 17 years. What happened? What it means. He looked at Harry with those red-tinged eyes. The protection your mother put on you. The love sacrifice. I understood the mechanism after, eventually. It had occurred to me in theory. I had dismissed it as insufficient. I was, a very slight pause. Incorrect. You were afraid of something you didn't understand, Harry said. So you called it insufficient and moved on. Voldemort's expression did something subtle. Not offense, more like the expression of a man being told something he already knows and finding the confirmation uncomfortable rather than revelatory. You sound like you've thought about this. I've had 10 years with a god who taught me to think carefully, Harry said. And I've had this year watching you move. You're brilliant. You're also running the same program you've been running since you were 17 years old, and it hasn't worked twice now and you're still running it. What program? Voldemort said, and the curiosity was entirely real. Fear as primary data, Harry said. Everything you've ever done has been fear management. Splitting your soul, fear of death. Creating an army, fear of vulnerability. Coming here, to this specific place, to this ground, fear of being on unfamiliar territory, so you chose territory with power and expected the power to be agnostic. Harry looked at the valley around them, the ancient carved walls, the tombs in the hillside. But you don't understand this ground at all. You thought you were choosing power. You chose his ground. His home. He gestured back toward Anubis without looking. And the power here doesn't belong to you. Voldemort looked past Harry. His eyes found Anubis, standing in the valley, still and enormous. Harry watched Voldemort look at Anubis. Watched the processing happen, the intelligence that had spent a lifetime calculating the threat level of everything it encountered, encountering something that exceeded every existing category and having to build a new one fast. Something moved in the red-tinged eyes that Harry had seen only twice before in anything, once in a man who had looked over a cliff edge by accident, and once in the fragment in the mirror chamber. Recognition of something true. The god of death, Voldemort said. His voice was level. He was controlling it. He's been waiting for you, Harry said. Voldemort's wand came up. Not at Anubis, at Harry, which was the tactical choice of a man who had decided that the available target was the one who was talking and the talking was leading somewhere he didn't want to go. Avada Kedavra, spoken with the specific cold clarity of a man who had said it so many times the words had lost all color for him, just tools, just language stripped of everything except function. Harry didn't move. The curse hit his chest and the light of it went out. Not deflected. Not absorbed in any mechanical sense. It went out the way a candle goes out when you put your hand over it, the light simply stopped, because the thing it needed to sustain itself wasn't there. The fear of death, the thing that powered the killing curse, the thing that made it function, Harry didn't have it. Had never had it. Had been raised by death's own representative since he was 6 years old and had been made, over a decade of quiet and deliberate and loving education, into someone for whom death was not an enemy or a threat or the end of everything. The curse had nothing to find. Voldemort stared. Harry looked at him. He felt the holly wand warm in his hand, felt the phoenix feather at its core, the brother of the wand that had made this curse many times, now in the hands of someone it had chosen for precisely this reason. He felt it very clearly, not triumph, not rage. Something cleaner. The feeling of a thing being in its right place after a long time in the wrong one. "Come with me," Harry said. Voldemort stared. "What?" "Away from the body," Harry said. "Away from all of it. Let the man go and come with me." He said it with the gentleness of someone delivering an instruction rather than an ultimatum, the tone of someone who has authority they didn't ask for and is using it correctly. "I'm not going to kill you." That was never what this was. "Then what?" Voldemort said, and his voice had changed now, the controlled precision of it fracturing slightly at the base, the way ice fractures when the structure underneath it has been affected. "Is this?" "This is a weighing," Harry said. He reached back without turning and Anubis was there, directly behind him, the feather in his hand, the feather of Ma'at, the truth feather, white and precise and absolute, the thing that had measured human souls since before the word human existed. The valley filled with something that was not light but was like light, the ambient luminescence of divine truth in a physical space, the valley's ancient stones absorbing and returning it in the way they'd been built to absorb and return it, the architects of this place having understood, more thoroughly than almost any civilization before or since, what this space was for. Voldemort made a sound. It was not a human sound and not an inhuman one. It was the sound of someone who has spent their entire life building walls and has just understood, in one complete moment, that walls don't work against this particular thing. That the thing he'd been running from was not death the monster, not the reaper, not the void, it was this. Judgment. Accuracy. The simple, total impossibility of being seen completely and being found to be something other than what you claimed. He couldn't maintain the host body. It collapsed, gently, because Harry had moved forward and caught it the way he'd caught Quirrell, the same instinct, the same refusal to let a person become collateral to something bigger than them. He lowered the man carefully to the valley floor. The man's eyes opened. He was alive, dazed, deeply confused. He would recover. Voldemort's soul, separated, was visible. It was not dramatic. It was not monstrous. It was small, not in the pejorative sense, but literally, the fragment that remained after decades of self-division was a small, cold, precise thing, the size of a child's fist, that hovered in the valley air with the quality of something that had forgotten how to be more than it was. The red eyes were still there, the intelligence still there, the fear present at the core of it like a seed in fruit. Harry looked at it. He felt the pity again. The thin thread of it. He did not dress it up or apologize for it because Anubis had taught him that accurate feeling was never wrong, only inaccurate feeling required correction. "I know what you could have been," Harry said. It was a specific truth. He'd seen Tom Riddle in the historical record that Anubis kept, the soul that had existed before the division, the brilliant, damaged, fiercely alive child who had needed what Harry had eventually been given and had not received it. "You should know that I know." The fragment was very still. Anubis stepped forward and held up the feather. The weighing happened. Harry didn't look away. Anubis had taught him to watch this, not because it was entertaining, but because witnessing it correctly was its own form of respect, for the soul being weighed and for the process itself. He watched the feather and the soul's accumulated weight find their relationship, watched the scale of truth and reality do what it had always done, what it had been doing since before Egypt had a name. Voldemort's soul was not destroyed. Harry had known it wouldn't be. Destruction was not what Anubis did, that was a human projection onto a divine process that was simply accurate. What Anubis did was assess and direct. He assessed the fragment with the complete and specific attention he brought to every soul, without adjustment for fame or infamy or the magnitude of what had been done in life, and he directed it accordingly. It was not the field of reeds. Harry had known that too. What it was, he didn't know the name of. Anubis had described it once, in the way he described things he considered technical information that Harry needed to understand the framework. A state of beginning again, stripped of accumulated damage, the soul returned to something that might, over a vast span of time, become something that the scales would receive differently. Not punishment. Not reward. Something more complicated and more specific than either. Voldemort went into it the way all things went into what Anubis directed, without ability to refuse, because there was no mechanism for refusal against the god who had held the scales since the first human being had died and the universe had needed someone to account for it accurately. The valley was quiet. Harry looked at the valley. He looked at the ancient walls, the carved hieroglyphs, the dark entrances to the tombs. He looked at the man on the ground, breathing steadily, who would wake up and not remember anything useful, who would be found by the Aurors Dumbledore was presumably already deploying and who would recover. He looked at Anubis beside him. The god of death stood in the valley he'd been connected to since before the valley had been built, on ground that had always been his in the sense that mattered, and he looked at Harry with those gold eyes and did not say anything. Harry did not say anything either. They had never needed many words for the things that mattered most between them. That had been true since the courtyard on the first night, since a 6-year-old had held out his arms and been held back without asking for anything to be explained first. Harry put his hand on Anubis's arm. Anubis put his hand over Harry's. That was all. The cleanup, as Hermione later described it in the tone of someone who has managed a complex logistical situation and wants it acknowledged, was considerable. 14 Death Eaters in various states of incapacitation in the Valley of the Kings at 10 o'clock at night required the involvement of both the British and Egyptian magical authorities, which involved 3 hours of communication across 2 continents and one very strained international magical liaison who'd been woken from sleep and handled it with admirable professionalism. The British ministry sent Aurors who arrived to find Harry Potter, whom they had been building toward a rescue operation for, sitting on the valley floor eating dates from a bag that Bastet had produced from somewhere, looking like someone who had resolved a significant situation and was allowing himself a moment. Fudge arrived personally at midnight. He was in his dressing gown under his robes, which Harry found endearing in an involuntary way. He stopped in front of Harry and said, "Is it done?" "It's done," Harry said. Fudge sat down on a convenient rock. The Death Eaters, all accounted for. Bastet made sure none of them left before your people arrived. He paused. She's been keeping them orderly. Fudge looked across the valley at Bastet, who had resumed human with cat ears form and was sitting on a rock above the grouped and thoroughly subdued Death Eaters with the specific quality of someone who is keeping something orderly in the way that lions keep gazelles orderly. He looked back at Harry. "And you know, gone," Harry said. "Not dead. Just, gone. I'll explain the mechanism to Dumbledore, who'll explain it to you in terms you'll find easier to sit with." He paused. "The main thing you need to know is that he cannot come back. The mechanism for coming back has been removed." Fudge stared at him. "Removed," he said. "Think of it as a permanent sentence," Harry said. "Delivered by someone with the authority to deliver it." He looked at Fudge. "You can announce the end of it, Minister. In any terms you want. That part's yours." Fudge looked at him, the politician's look, calculating what was being offered and whether there was a catch, and found, apparently, that there wasn't. He looked at a loss for words, which was not, Harry gathered, his natural condition. "Why?" Fudge said. "Why are you? Because the wizarding world needs the end of this to be public and clear," Harry said. "And because you need a win." He said it without mockery. "You've been managing an impossible situation all year, underfunded and underinformed and working with a ministry that's terrified. Give them the win. You were part of the structure that responded when it mattered." Fudge stared at him for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, "You are nothing like I expected." "I've heard that before," Harry said. "I imagine you have," Fudge said. Ron dropped down onto the valley floor beside Harry, having come from somewhere slightly higher where he'd been helping Hermione direct Aurors with the confident authority of someone who turned out to be very good at telling people where to be. He had a bruise developing on his right forearm from the stunning spell and he was wearing it with the casual disregard of someone who had earned it and knew it. "Done," Ron said. "Done," Harry said. "Good." Ron accepted a date from the bag. He ate it. He looked at the valley around them, the ancient walls, the stars overhead in their correct positions. "This is a brilliant place," he said. "Horrible circumstances. Brilliant place." "It is," Harry agreed. Hermione arrived and sat down on Harry's other side and did not say anything for a full minute, which from Hermione was the equivalent of a very long speech. Then, "He's really gone." "He's really gone," Harry said. "The Horcruxes, Anubis dealt with them," Harry said. "The pieces of his soul that he'd put into objects. Anubis has been, it's been an ongoing project. Since last year." He paused. "Turns out that hidden pieces of human soul are fairly easy to locate if you are the god responsible for all human souls." Hermione pressed her lips together in the expression she made when something she'd been anxious about was resolved. "Right," she said. "Right," Harry said. "And now?" "And now," Harry said, "we go home. Both homes. Yours, and mine." He looked at the valley, at the stars. He thought about September 1st and a scarlet train and a hall full of people learning his name. He thought about the courtyard at dawn with the gods he'd called his family since he was 6 years old. He thought about Hermione on one side and Ron on the other, which was, he had decided sometime in the autumn, the correct arrangement, the two specific people who had chosen him in an antechamber before they knew anything worth knowing about him and had not, since then, stopped choosing him. "And then?" Ron said. "And then I go back to Hogwarts," Harry said. "Finish my education. Take my exams." He paused. "Try to make it through a year where someone isn't trying to kill me." "That would be a change," Ron said. "A welcome one," Hermione said. Behind them, across the valley, Bastet had allowed the Aurors to take over Death Eater management and was walking toward them, not hurrying, simply coming with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows where she's going. She sat beside Harry and said nothing, which was not her usual mode but which told him everything about what she was feeling, the rare complete quiet of a being who has been holding a great deal for a long time and can finally, in this specific moment, set it down. He leaned his shoulder into hers. She put her arm around him. Anubis came last, from the direction of the tombs, rising out of the valley's deepest shadow with his gold eyes finding Harry immediately in the crowd of Aurors and ministry personnel and all the complicated human machinery of Aftermath. He walked to where they sat, this small group on the valley floor, the gods and the students and the stars overhead, and he stood at the edge of it and looked at all of them with his measuring, ancient, specific attention. Then he sat down. On the ground, cross-legged, the way he'd sat in the courtyard on Harry's first night, elbows on his knees, utterly without ceremony. An Auror passing by them stopped and stared at the jackal-headed figure sitting cross-legged on the valley floor eating dates from a shared bag with 2 teenagers and a goddess. The Auror opened his mouth. "Keep moving," Bastet said pleasantly, without looking up. The Auror kept moving. Ron looked at Anubis. Anubis looked at Ron. The 5-second eye contact was already a thing between them, something that had started in the Hogwarts grounds and had apparently become a recurring event. "Good," Anubis said, at the end of it. "You keep saying that," Ron said. "You keep earning it," Anubis said. Ron went slightly red. He ate another date and looked at the sky. Hermione said, "Can I ask you something? About the weighing. What happened tonight?" "Ask," Anubis said. Was there any part of him that could have been different? If things had gone differently when he was young? She asked it with the care of someone who understands the weight of the question and is asking it honestly rather than rhetorically. Or was he always going to be, there was a boy, Anubis said. Before the choices. A very specific boy, brilliant and afraid and in need of what I gave this one. He looked at Harry. The boy who chose the path that Tom Riddle chose, that was not inevitable. There were moments. Many moments. The path closed slowly. He paused. This is the difficult thing to understand about judgment. I weigh what is, not what could have been. What could have been is another grief entirely. A real one. The valley was quiet around them. The Aurors moved at their distance, the ministry performed its functions, the stars continued in their ancient courses overhead. Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "You ask good questions," Anubis said. "Ask more of them." "Always." Harry went back to Hogwarts on a Thursday. Not alone, with Ron and Hermione, the three of them arriving through the main gates in the early September morning, because summer had ended while they'd been in Egypt and September had arrived while they weren't paying full attention, and the new year was beginning. The castle did what it did, adjusted, accommodated, recognized him with the specific warmth of very old magic that has decided someone belongs in it. The torches burned slightly warmer when he walked past them, which was subtle enough that nobody commented on it but which Harry felt the same way he felt anything the castle communicated, as a specific quality of the ambient space. McGonagall met them in the entrance hall. She looked at the three of them, at the bruise on Ron's arm, at Hermione's careful composure, at Harry, and said, "Egypt." "Egypt," Harry confirmed. "Dumbledore will want to see you," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll go up now." He paused. "The new students arrive this afternoon." "At 6, she said. "Good," he said. "I want to be here for that." She looked at him. The professional expression was present, as always, the long-practiced competence she wore like armor. And under it, as always, the real thing, the woman who had known his mother, who had sat at a meeting in the staff room with a goddess, who had received information about Lily Potter's piece and carried it forward. "Welcome back," she said. She said it simply, meaning, all of it. The year. The outcome. Him. "It's good to be back," he said, and meant, all of it. Dumbledore's office was warm and bright in the morning light, the instruments turning on their shelves, Fawkes performing his slow, brilliant revolution on his perch. The headmaster was at his desk, older than he'd looked in September, which was the tax a long year levied on a person who carried as much as he did. He looked at Harry when he came in. "It's done," Harry said. "I know," Dumbledore said. "The ministry has been quite thorough in their communication." A pause. "How are you?" The question landed differently from how it would have in September. It was not a professional inquiry, not a preliminary to something else. It was the actual question. Harry sat down across from the old man and considered it honestly. "Fine," he said. And this time, like the time he'd said it on the Hogwarts steps with Ron beside him, it was the truth. Not the worn smooth lie. It ended the way it needed to. "Not the way I planned," Dumbledore said. "Better than the way you planned," Harry said. "Your plan required something terrible to happen to me first." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "It did." He looked at Harry with the blue eyes, clear and old and in this moment entirely without performance. "I have spent the summer thinking about that. About the plans I made. About what they assumed. And," Harry said. "And I think that intelligence without love," Dumbledore said carefully, "produces strategies that are technically correct and humanly wrong. I had the shape of the solution but I had prioritized the outcome over the person, and a solution that damages the person it was meant to protect is, not a solution." He looked at his hands. "Your guardians understood something I did not. That you cannot manufacture the right kind of person through suffering. You can only produce the right kind of person through love." He looked up. "They did that. Thoroughly." "They did," Harry said. "I would like to meet them," Dumbledore said. "Properly. Not in a crisis." He paused. "If they're willing." Harry thought about Bastet's opinion of Dumbledore, which had been direct and sustained over the year. He thought about how it had shifted after the staff meeting, the conversation he hadn't been present for. He thought about what Anubis would make of the old man, Anubis who weighed souls, who looked at what was present not what was proclaimed. "I'll ask," he said. "I think Bastet will want to give you a piece of her mind first." "I expect that," Dumbledore said, with the equanimity of a man who has made peace with deserving it. "I'll receive it gratefully." "Good," Harry said. He stood. "I want to be there when the first years arrive tonight. For the sorting." "Of course," Dumbledore said. He watched Harry move toward the door, the specific way he moved, the ease of it, the quality of presence that filled a room without demanding it. "Harry." Harry stopped. "Thank you," Dumbledore said. "Not for the outcome, though I am grateful. For what you gave me the chance to become. A different kind of partner in this than I was prepared to be." He paused. "I am a better headmaster than I was in September. I think that is, in part, your doing." Harry looked at him. He thought about the things Anubis had taught him about accurate feeling, about giving it its correct weight, neither more nor less. "You had it in you already," Harry said. "I just didn't hide what I was. That made it easier for you to see what you needed to change." He paused. "Don't waste the seeing." "I won't," Dumbledore said. Harry left. He was in the entrance hall when the first years came through the doors, damp from the boats, wide-eyed, clutching each other in the way first years always did. He stood to the side as they filed past, these small and significant people at the beginning of something, with their whole Hogwarts ahead of them. One of them, a small girl with enormous glasses and a very determined expression, looked directly at him as she passed and said, with the extraordinary forthrightness of an 11-year-old who has decided a thing, "Are you Harry Potter?" "Yes," he said. She looked at his scar. She looked at his face. She considered him with the frank assessment that children bring to everything before they've learned to be subtle about it. "You don't look like the story," she said. "I know," Harry said. "The story got some things wrong." She nodded, satisfied by this answer, and moved on into the great hall with the rest of her cohort. Harry followed. He sat at the Gryffindor table between Ron and Hermione, his place, specific and earned, the space that had been his since September 1st, and watched the sorting begin. He watched each name called with the attention of someone who understood the weight of the moment for the person sitting on the stool, the enormous particular experience of being read completely and placed accordingly. He ate. He talked. He laughed at something Ron said. He listened to Hermione's thoughts on the theoretical implications of Anubis's description of soul architecture, which she'd been developing since the Valley and which were both technically rigorous and, Harry thought, going to become a very important piece of magical scholarship when she eventually wrote it down. The candles floated. The ceiling showed the early autumn sky, clear and full of stars. He was, for the first time since September 1st of the previous year, simply a student at a school. Not a weapon, not a prophecy, not a symbol. Just Harry, between his friends, in a castle that had decided it liked him. Just himself. He thought about the storm, 10 years ago, and the step, and the cat that had found him. He thought about the warmth that had moved up through his cold hands. He thought about the courtyard with its herbs in clay pots and its game board and its books stacked by the door. He thought, "I am everything they made me. I am everything I chose. I am not afraid of anything that is still coming." He thought it the way you think facts. Cleanly, completely. He ate his dinner and watched the stars through the open ceiling, and the year settled around him like the wool blanket that had been at the bottom of his trunk since Bastet packed it, present, warm, heavy in the good way. Outside, somewhere on the grounds, in the specific darkness between the lake and the forest, two figures stood in the September night. One golden-eyed and warm. One ancient and still. Both of them looking up at the lit windows of the great hall. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to.